Picture this. A man is standing in the middle of the New Mexico desert. He is wearing nothing but a pair of tidy whities, a green button-up shirt that he never fully buttoned in the chaos, and a gas mask hanging loose around his neck. His glasses are crooked. There is a smear of something across his chin that might be vomit, might be blood, might be both. The RV behind him is hissing and leaking smoke like a wounded animal. In one trembling hand, he is holding a small camcorder, and into that camcorder, he is recording a goodbye message to a wife and a son he is certain he is never going to see alive again. In his other hand, he is holding a pistol, and he is pointing that pistol down a long, empty stretch of desert road as the wail of distant sirens grows closer with every second. Now, if you saw this guy on any other day, on a regular Tuesday, walking through a grocery store with a handbasket and a coupon for paper towels, you would not look at him twice. You would not even look once. He is the kind of man who disappears into beige walls, khaki pants, a sad little mustache that has not changed since the Carter administration, sensible shoes, a voice so quiet and apologetic it sounds like he is sorry for taking up oxygen in your general direction. He teaches high school chemistry to teenagers who openly drool onto their desks while he talks, and on the weekends, he scrubs down rich people's cars at the local car wash for extra cash. His name is Walter Hartwell White. He is 50 years old, he is broke, he is sick, he is tired, and he is about to become one of the most dangerous men in the American Southwest. This is his story. All of it. The teacher, the father, the chemist, the killer, the kingpin, the corpse. Every single choice, every lie, every body, every excuse he ever whispered to himself in the dark on the way to being something worse. We are going from a man who is afraid to send back the wrong order at a Denny's to a man who watches a young woman choke to death in front of him and decides, very calmly, not to lift a finger. We are going from a meek apology in the kitchen to a confession on a rooftop. And by the time this is over, I want you to understand something that took Walter himself almost his entire descent to actually say out loud. He did not break bad because of cancer. He did not break bad for his family. He did not break bad because the universe owed him anything. He broke bad because some part of him, buried under decades of resentment and disappointment and politeness, had been hungry for it for a very long time. So let us go back. All the way back. Before the desert. Before the pork pie hat. Before the goatee. Before the name Heisenberg ever crossed his lips. Let us start with the saddest version of Walter White, because that is the version that haunts everything that comes after. Walt is the kind of genius that came with a price tag. Back in his younger days, he was a serious player in the world of chemistry. We are talking real, glittering, headline-making science. He worked on research that contributed in some small but real way to a Nobel Prize. He co-founded a company called Gray Matter Technologies with two people who would haunt him for the rest of his life. A colleague named Elliot Schwartz and a brilliant young woman named Gretchen, who Walt was dating at the time. The three of them were standing on the edge of something enormous. He was young. He was in love. He had a future you could fit 1,000 lifetimes inside. And then, for reasons the show keeps deliberately blurry around the edges, Walt walked away from it. He sold his share of the company for $5,000. $5,000. And not long after he left, Gray Matter exploded into a billion-dollar empire that put Elliot and Gretchen on magazine covers, while Walt taught balanced equations to sleeping teenagers in Albuquerque. If you ask him, he will tell you it was Gretchen's family. He will tell you he felt small around her wealthy parents in their massive East Coast house. He will tell you he sensed he did not belong and pulled the cord before they could throw him out. He will tell you he was the one who walked. But the truth is messier than that. And the truth is exactly the kind of thing Walt spends the entire show running from. The truth is that Walt's pride is bigger than his ambition. He would rather be the smartest man in a room full of idiots than the second smartest in a room full of geniuses. So when he felt himself slipping out of the spotlight, when he could feel that he was about to be the third name on the patent, the third face on the magazine, the man who got carried by the other two, he chose to vanish entirely. And then he spent the next 2 decades of his life choking on it. Every time a former colleague's face popped up on the television, every time his bank account hit empty, every time he had to swallow his pride and ask his old friends for help, and they offered him a job out of pity. Every single time. So by the time we meet him in the pilot, Walter White is a walking compressed spring. He is married to Skylar, a woman who is sharp, observant, and absolutely not stupid, even if Walt has spent years quietly convincing himself she might be. They have a teenage son, Walter Jr., who has cerebral palsy and uses crutches. A kid with a kind heart, an extremely large love for breakfast, and a complicated worship for his father that becomes one of the running tragicomic threads of the entire series. Skylar is also pregnant with their second child, a baby girl, surprise of the decade, conceived at a moment in the marriage when, frankly, neither of them had much enthusiasm left for the project. They live in a modest house in a quiet New Mexico suburb. The pool out back has a slow leak. The mortgage is 1 bad month away from becoming a problem. And the most exciting thing on Walter's 50th birthday is when his wife sets down a plate of veggie bacon in front of him. Because real bacon has been off the menu for years, and on top of his eggs, she has arranged little strips of that veggie bacon into the number 50. 50 years on planet Earth, and his birthday breakfast is a sad piece of soy product spelling out the number. His brother-in-law, Hank Schrader, is the kind of man Walter is not. Hank is a DEA agent. Big, loud, swaggering, the life of every barbecue. The guy who corners you with a beer in one hand and a story about a meth bust in the other. Hank loves Walter. He genuinely loves him, but you can see it in every single interaction between them. Hank pities Walt. Hank looks at Walt the way you would look at a guy who never quite caught the wave. And at Walter's 50th birthday party, when the entire family is gathered in the living room, Hank pulls out his service pistol like a kid showing off a new toy and lets Walter Jr. hold it, and Skylar scolds him. And Hank turns to Walt with a big toothy grin and basically tells the room to take a good long look at Walt, because this is what a real man looks like. And Walt smiles politely. Because Walt has had a lifetime of practice smiling politely while the world makes him invisible. And then, just to put a perfect cap on the worst birthday in the history of birthdays, Walt collapses at the car wash a few days later. He is hosing down a Mercedes. His chest seizes up, the world tilts, and he wakes up in the back of an ambulance, getting the kind of news that turns the rest of your life into a countdown. Inoperable lung cancer. Stage 3A. Maybe 2 years if the treatments are kind. The cruel little joke being, of course, that Walt has never smoked a day in his life. He is a chemistry teacher who taught his students about the carcinogens in cigarettes, and his lungs decided to betray him anyway. Standard Walter White luck. The universe handing him a thank you card for 50 years of being careful, of being good, of being quiet, of waiting his turn. Now here is where most people would have a breakdown. Walt has one too, but it is a quiet one. He does not even tell his family at first. He just sits with it. He goes to school. He grades quizzes. He folds laundry. And he does that thing he has always done. That thing that is so deeply Walter White it might as well be tattooed across his forehead. He calculates. He runs the numbers. He looks at his savings, his mortgage, his son's future college tuition, his pregnant wife's medical bills, his own treatment costs. And he realizes that even if he does absolutely everything right, even if he works every shift, takes every extra class, scrubs every car, when he dies, he is going to leave his family with debt. Not money, debt. And probably not much later, he is going to leave them at all. And then the universe, in its infinite love of irony, hands Walter White a second envelope. Hank, his swaggering brother-in-law, invites him along on a DEA ride-along. A little adventure. Get out of the house, Walt. See what real life is like. You might enjoy the show. And Walt, numb and curious and quietly desperate, says yes. They roll up on a meth lab in a quiet Albuquerque neighborhood. The DEA storms the place, and from the relative safety of Hank's car, Walt watches two things happen simultaneously that are going to change the trajectory of his entire remaining life. He sees a duffel bag of cash being heaved into the back of a getaway car by a fleeing dealer. A duffel bag stuffed visibly thick with rolls of bills. And then he sees the dealer's face, and he recognizes him. It is a kid he used to teach, a burnout, a back-of-the-classroom slacker, a waste of a perfectly serviceable brain that Walt used to mock under his breath. A kid named Jesse Pinkman. And just like that, Walter White has an idea. An incredibly stupid, incredibly dangerous, incredibly seductive idea. If a kid like Jesse Pinkman can cook meth in a residential neighborhood and rake in that kind of cash, then a man like Walter White, an actual chemist, a man with degrees and patents and a brain that once almost won a Nobel Prize, could probably make himself a small private fortune. So with a stack of textbooks under his arm and absolutely zero idea what he is about to unleash, Walter tracks Jesse down. He corners him in his driveway. He does not moralize. He does not lecture. He just looks at this scared, twitchy, baggy-pants former student of his and pitches a partnership. Jesse knows the business. Walt knows the chemistry. They cook, they sell, they split the money. End of story. Jesse stares at him like he is hallucinating. His old chemistry teacher, Mr. White, the guy who used to bore him to death about polymers, is now standing in his driveway asking to make meth with him. And to make the whole thing even more surreal, Walt throws in a little threat for good measure, that if Jesse does not agree, Walt is happy to give Jesse's name to the DEA, which is its own little preview of who Walt is about to become. The bullying, the leverage, the whole I am doing you a favor by ruining your life flavor. But Jesse is broke and desperate and weirdly amused, and so he says yes. And so begins one of the most toxic, complicated, occasionally even beautiful relationships in television history. They scrape together a few $1,000s, drive out into the middle of the desert in a beat-up old RV that Jesse has somehow acquired, and set up a mobile laboratory in the dust. Walt insists on stripping down to his underwear so the chemical smell does not soak into his clothes and follow him home to his wife. Jesse stares at him in his underwear with the resigned exhaustion of a man whose life has now officially veered off into the surreal. Walt starts barking instructions like he is still in his chemistry classroom, fussing over every step, every measurement, every gram. Jesse rolls his eyes so hard you can almost hear them. They mix, they cook, they purify. And what comes out at the end of it is the purest, most beautiful crystal methamphetamine either of them has ever seen. So pure, it has a faint blue tinge to it. So pure that Jesse, who has been around this stuff his entire adult life, just stands there holding a piece of it up to the sunlight, his eyes a little wet. This is not street product. This is not the swill the cartels are flooding the region with. This is high craftsmanship in the shape of poison. And Walt looks at the crystal, and for the first time in maybe 20 years, he feels something other than tired. The problem is that the desert is not actually a private workspace. Jesse, in his infinite wisdom, has already bragged to one of his old contacts that he is cooking something new, something special. The contact is a small-time dealer named Crazy 8, and Crazy 8 shows up at the RV with his partner, Emilio, who happens to be the guy Jesse was working with the day Walt did the DEA ride-along. And Emilio is now convinced that Jesse is a snitch. Suddenly, Walt and Jesse are on the wrong end of two pistols in the middle of nowhere, and the entire meth fantasy is about to end with 2 bullets and a shallow grave. So Walt does the only thing he can think of. He offers them the recipe. He pretends to be willing to teach them on the spot, lures them inside the RV, locks them in, throws together a quick reaction of red phosphorus and water and chemicals he knows will react badly when heated, and basically gasses them. He and Jesse stumble out into the desert, coughing, as the inside of the RV fills with toxic smoke and the two dealers inside collapse. Emilio is dead, but Crazy 8 is not. He is just unconscious, and now Walt and Jesse have a real problem on their hands. They drag Crazy 8 back to Jesse's basement, chain him by the neck to a metal post with a bicycle lock, and stare at him like he is a math problem they cannot bring themselves to solve. What do they do with him? Letting him go means he comes back and kills both of them, and probably their families for good measure. Killing him means crossing a line that neither of them has ever crossed in their lives. They flip a coin. Walt gets the bad side of the coin. Jesse gets the slightly less bad side. Walt has to kill Crazy 8. Jesse has to dispose of Emilio's body. Jesse, panicked and overwhelmed, takes the only path he can think of. He found a bottle of hydrofluoric acid in Walt's classroom, the kind of stuff Walt has been carefully teaching him about. The kind of stuff that eats through almost anything. Walt tells him, very specifically and very clearly, to use a plastic container. A rubber tote. Anything but the bathtub. Anything but porcelain. And Jesse, very carelessly and very specifically, uses the bathtub. And in one of the most stomach-turning scenes in the entire series, the acid eats through the porcelain, then through the floor, and the half-dissolved soup of what used to be Emilio Koyama comes crashing through Jesse's ceiling in a wet red avalanche that splatters Jesse like the worst horror movie ever made. The smell, the mess, the bone fragments, the realization. It is the first time Jesse really understands, in his marrow, what he has done. It will not be the last. Walt, meanwhile, draws the harder ticket, or maybe what he secretly wanted, which is the longer one. He has to kill Crazy 8. And what makes this whole sequence so brilliant, and so foundational for everything Walt becomes, is how long he stalls. He brings Crazy 8 sandwiches. He brings him beer. He talks to him. He plays the kindly chemistry teacher, the regretful suburban dad who got in way over his head. He almost convinces himself, that he can just let the guy go. He sits at his kitchen table and makes a list on a yellow notepad. Reasons to kill Crazy 8 and reasons not to kill Crazy 8. The reasons to kill him fill the page in tight little bullet points. The reasons not to kill him are a single sad scribbled line that basically boils down to it being wrong. That is the entire defense humanity gets in this moment. It is just wrong. That is the only argument left on the side of mercy. And then Walt notices, while he is preparing to set Crazy 8 free, that a piece of the plate he dropped earlier when he stumbled bringing the man food is missing. A jagged shard of broken ceramic, hidden in Crazy 8's pocket, and he understands, with a sick, sinking feeling, that the second he unlocks that bike chain, this man is going to drive that shard into his throat. There is no path to mercy here. There is no Walter White the teacher way out of this. And so Walt, hands shaking, eyes wet, mumbling apologies the entire time, strangles Crazy 8 to death with the bike chain. And when it is finally over, when the body stops twitching, he sits down on the basement steps and he sobs. Real, ugly, gut-wrenched sobs. Because in this moment, he still knows what he just did. He still knows that he has just crossed a line he cannot uncross. The man who sits down on those stairs is not the same man who taught the periodic table that morning. He is something new. Something he has not named yet. Meanwhile, in the upstairs world, Walt's lie is starting to grow. Skylar can sense something is off. He is coming home at strange hours. He is distracted. He is exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with treatments, because he has not even told her about the cancer yet. In the most Walter White fashion possible, he has decided that the way to handle catastrophic news is to bury it under a smile and an extra load of dirty laundry. When he finally does tell the family, it is at a kind of forced living room intervention with Skylar, Walter Jr., Marie, and Hank, all of them passing around a little talking pillow that they have to hold whenever it is their turn to speak. Walt grits his teeth through it like he is serving a prison sentence. Everyone has opinions. Everyone wants him to fight. Everyone has a brochure, an experimental treatment, a clinic upstate, a friend's friend's cousin who beat it. Walt sits there listening to his family decide what he is going to do with his own death, and finally, he snaps. He talks about choice, about being a man, about the fact that maybe he does not want to spend his last few months puking and weak and bald so they can have an extra month of him being a vegetable in a hospital bed. It is the first time we see real fire in him in front of his family. Skylar looks at him afterward like she does not quite recognize the person she is married to. The cancer treatments do happen, partly because Skylar and Walter Jr. beg him to try, partly because Gretchen and Elliot Schwartz, his old Gray Matter co-founders, get wind of the diagnosis through the family grapevine and reach out. And here is one of the most quietly revealing scenes in early Walter White. Gretchen calls. She is gentle. She is concerned. She invites Walt over to their massive house in Albuquerque. And when he arrives, Elliot shows him around their absurd mansion and offers him a job at Gray Matter. Full salary, full benefits, full health coverage, no real work expected, just a way to get the bills paid while Walt fights the disease. It is the warmest, kindest, most no-strings-attached offer you could possibly imagine. They are not even asking for an explanation. They just want to help. And Walt sits at their dinner table, across from Gretchen and her perfect husband, in their perfect house, with their perfect view of the desert. And he tells them, very politely, no. And he goes home and lies to Skylar about it and tells her he said yes. He lets her believe that Gretchen and Elliot are paying for his treatments. He lets her thank Gretchen on the phone. He would rather cook meth in a desert and risk his life and his family's safety than accept charity from the two people he resents the most in the entire world. He would rather die a martyr than live as a man he does not respect. And right there, in that tiny invisible decision, you get the whole architecture of his soul. Pride, pride, and more pride. So the treatments roll on, and the cooking rolls on, and the lies start to multiply like a chemical chain reaction. Walt and Jesse start expanding their tiny little operation, which immediately puts them on a collision course with someone they really, really do not want to know exists. A man named Tuco Salamanca. Tuco is not a businessman. Tuco is a tornado in a leather jacket. He is a mid-level Albuquerque distributor with bloodshot eyes, a constant meth high that he refuses to step down from, and a smile that means he is about 3 seconds away from either hugging you like a brother or stomping your jaw into the pavement. When Jesse first goes to him to pitch the new blue meth, Tuco beats Jesse half to death right in front of him and takes the entire batch as a free sample, leaving Jesse curled up in a hospital bed wrapped in bandages, his face a swollen purple disaster. And here is the moment. Walt, the meek chemistry teacher, the guy who used to apologize for breathing in his own wife's direction, walks into Tuco's hideout on his own. No backup, no weapon. Just a paper bag. Inside the bag is what looks like the blue product, but Walt knows it is not. It is fulminated mercury, a contact explosive that he has whipped up specifically for this occasion. Walt has shaved his head completely by this point because the chemotherapy is making his hair come out in patches anyway, and there is something deliberate about how he has chosen to remake himself. Bald, bare, almost monk-like. He walks into Tuco's lair with his dome shining under the lights, sets the bag on the table, and asks for his money plus a new ongoing deal. Tuco laughs in his face. Tuco's goons close in, and Walt picks up a single crystal of what he claims is his product, throws it onto the floor, and the entire room explodes. Windows blow out, plaster rains from the ceiling. Tuco's goons hit the carpet. And in the chaos and the smoke, this small, bald, dying chemistry teacher stands in the middle of the room and tells Tuco, in a voice so flat it is almost bored, that the bag is full of the same compound, and he can blow them all into the parking lot unless Tuco agrees to his terms. And Tuco, crazy beautiful Tuco, does not get angry. Tuco gets thrilled. Because Tuco recognizes something in this little bald man that the little bald man has not quite recognized in himself yet. Tuco sees a guy who is enjoying this. A guy who is more alive in this moment than he has probably been in 20 years. They make a deal on the spot. Walt walks out with a duffel bag full of cash. And on his way out, when Tuco demands a name for the man with the magic meth, Walt pauses for a second on the threshold and gives him one. Heisenberg. After Werner Heisenberg, the physicist behind the uncertainty principle. It is exactly the kind of nerdy little wink that only a chemistry teacher would make. But it sticks. It sticks so hard that within a couple of years, it will eat him alive. For a brief stretch, things almost work. Walt and Jesse keep cooking. The money rolls in. Walt starts hiding stacks of cash in increasingly absurd places. In the crawl space under the house, behind the insulation in the attic, taped to the underside of the diaper bag. Skylar is partially let in on the truth, just enough to make her dangerous. She knows Walt has a second source of income. She does not know where it comes from. He spins her a long, increasingly stupid story about a secret marijuana habit, then about a gambling addiction, supposedly bankrolled by an unnamed benefactor who is paying out gigantic winnings. Which is one of the funniest and most strained lies in the entire series, because Walter White looks about as much like a degenerate gambler as a calculator looks like a club kid. Skylar does not fully buy it. She does not have to. The check's clear, and her own life is complicated enough that she does not push as hard as she should. Tuco, meanwhile, becomes a problem the second he stops being convenient. He is too volatile, too paranoid. He starts beating his own men over imagined slights. In one of the more horrifying little side scenes, he kills one of his own crew in front of Walt and Jesse for almost no reason, mid-conversation, just because he did not like a particular tone of voice. Walt realizes very quickly that Tuco is not a long-term business partner. He is a ticking bomb wearing a gold chain. And so Walt does what Walt is going to do over and over and over again across his entire arc. He decides to remove the problem. He and Jesse plan to poison Tuco with ricin, a deadly toxin Walt has produced in his classroom, because of course he has. The plan is to slip it into Tuco's stash. They never get the chance. Tuco kidnaps both of them, drags them out to a remote desert hideout where his ancient stroke-paralyzed uncle Hector lives. And things go sideways in every possible direction at once. Hector is one of the more unforgettable creations of this entire universe. He is a former cartel hitman who has been so completely ruined by a stroke that he sits in a wheelchair and communicates entirely through a little silver bell that he taps with his thumb. Ding, ding, ding. He hates everything except his family, and his family hates everything that is not them. When Tuco's behavior in front of him starts to suggest that Walt and Jesse have been talking trash, the bell starts ringing in a furious little rhythm, and you can feel the temperature in the room drop. Tuco is about to kill them both. Hank, Walt's brother-in-law, the DEA agent, is the one who actually ends the Tuco problem in a way no one sees coming. Hank has been tracking Tuco completely independently of any of this, has tracked his pickup truck out into the desert, and rolls up on the hideout in a one-man shootout. He is a big city DEA agent in a sweat-stained shirt, alone, against Tuco's whole operation. And he ends Tuco with a single, carefully placed bullet through the chest. And the show drops in one of those gorgeous, quiet ironies it loves so much. Walt and Jesse are hiding in the brush, watching from a distance. They see Hank kill Tuco. And Hank gets a promotion out of it. He gets reassigned to El Paso to chase bigger fish for the El Paso DEA office, and his career bumps to a new level. Walt's biggest threat has just been removed by his own brother-in-law, who has no idea he just saved Walt's life. And Walt smiles, almost imperceptibly, because the universe is starting to rearrange itself around him in ways he is starting to find genuinely amusing. But that El Paso assignment is going to come back and gut Hank in ways neither of them sees coming. Down in Texas, working with cartel informants, Hank is at the wrong place at the wrong time. There is a moment that is hard to forget, where the DEA is meeting an informant called Tortuga, the Spanish word for turtle, in the middle of the desert. Tortuga, it turns out, has already been killed by the cartel, and his severed head has been mounted on the shell of an actual living desert tortoise that is wandering toward the agents. There is a bomb attached to the underside. The other agents joke about it for a moment, take pictures with the head, posing like idiots. Hank, his stomach turning, walks back to the truck for a minute, and the bomb goes off behind him. The DEA agents in the foreground, men Hank had just been laughing with, are torn apart in front of him. He is one of the few survivors, and he carries that scene around with him for the rest of his life. The trauma cracks him. He starts having panic attacks. He throws up in bathrooms before going into the field. The big, swaggering Hank Schrader that we met in the pilot starts to splinter from the inside, and his happy-go-lucky surface becomes harder and harder to maintain. It is important to remember Hank during all of this, because Hank is the moral compass of this entire universe, and his slow grinding down across the seasons mirrors Walt's slow grinding up in ways that hit harder the closer you look. Back home, Walt's family life is fraying at the seams. Skyler is increasingly suspicious. Walter Jr. is increasingly worried about his father's moods and his disappearances and the way he flinches when the phone rings. Walt's old high school chemistry colleagues have noticed he is acting strangely, and the cancer treatment, miraculously, is working. The tumors are shrinking. Walt's death sentence has been quietly downgraded to a maybe someday much later, which should be the happiest news of his life. And in a perfectly staged scene, Walt gets the news from his doctor, and instead of crying with joy, he ducks into a hospital bathroom and punches a paper towel dispenser until his knuckles split open and his hand is bleeding into the sink. Because part of him does not want to live. Part of him wanted the excuse. Part of him is starting to realize that this beautiful new life, this Heisenberg life, this respect and danger and money and adrenaline, only exists because he was supposed to be dying soon. And if he is not dying soon, then who is he supposed to be? Just Walt again? Just Walt in his khakis at the car wash? After all of this? That is a question Walter White is going to spend the rest of the show trying very hard not to answer. Jesse, in the meantime, is having his own crisis. He has been kicked out of his parents' house permanently. He has been living rough. He has had to scramble to find a new place to live, and the place he stumbles into is the bottom half of a duplex owned by a soft-spoken woman named Jane Margolis, who lives in the unit above him and works as a tattoo artist. Jane is bright, sharp, sarcastic, a year and change clean from heroin addiction, and an incredibly perceptive observer of every con Jesse tries to run. The two of them fall in together fast. There is a tenderness to their early scenes that feels different from anything else in the show. Two damaged people who somehow see past each other's damage and like what they find there. She introduces him to the artist she admires, Georgia O'Keeffe, and the two of them lie on her bed talking about whether painting the same door over and over again counts as art or obsession. It is the closest thing Jesse has had to a peaceful relationship in years. But Walt is in the middle of pushing Jesse for more product, more money, more of a partnership that is becoming increasingly one-sided. And there is a money dispute between them, where Walt holds back Jesse's cut to try to control him. Jesse goes to Walt's home, drunk and furious, screams at him from the lawn. Walt's family hears the whole thing. Skylar, who has just begun the long process of separating herself from Walt emotionally, sees this stranger screaming at her husband and asks who he is. Jesse, in front of all of them, calls himself Walt's marijuana connection. It is a moment of pure, ugly, accidental honesty wrapped in a different lie, and Skylar files it away. When Jesse and Walt fall out again over a different money dispute, when Walt one more time pushes Jesse away when Jesse needs him, Jesse and Jane both slip. They had been celebrating their respective sobriety together, sort of leaning on each other through a fragile new attempt at being clean. And one bad night, one heroin balloon between them, undoes more than a year of careful work. They use together. They go from clean and trying to fragile and lost in the space of one evening. What happens next is one of the most important scenes in Walter White's entire moral collapse. Walt shows up at Jesse's apartment late at night. Jane has been pressuring Jesse to demand his half of the money from the latest cook, threatening to blackmail Walt if he refuses to pay. Walt goes there to talk it out, to get Jesse to come back to the lab, to fix the partnership. He walks into the bedroom. He finds Jesse passed out on his back, Jane next to him, both of them high. He tries to wake Jesse up by shaking his shoulder, and in the process, he accidentally jostles Jane onto her back. Within seconds, she starts choking on her own vomit. The science of opioid overdose. The body relaxes, the throat does not protect itself. A body lying on its back has nowhere for the vomit to go. And Walter White does nothing. He stands there. He just stands there. He could turn her head to the side, the way every basic first aid class on Earth teaches you. He could shake Jesse hard enough to wake him up. He could call 911. He could yell. He could do anything. And instead, he just watches. Whatever is going on inside his head in that moment, fear, calculation, opportunity, an internal voice telling him that Jane is a threat to his operation, that she is bad for Jesse, that she is going to ruin everything, it freezes him in place. There are tears in his eyes the entire time. The tears are real. The horror on his face is real. But the horror does not translate into action. He just stays there. He watches a young woman, somebody else's daughter, somebody else's whole world, die on a mattress in front of him. And when she finally stops moving, he just keeps standing there for a long time. This is the second great line he crosses. The first was Crazy 8, which was a kill in self-defense. This is something completely different. This is a passive murder. This is letting someone die because their absence is more convenient than their presence. And Walter White is never going to recover from this, even if he refuses to admit it to himself for years. The lie he tells himself about Jane's death is going to mutate and infect every other lie he tells, every relationship he has, every decision he makes from this moment on. Because Jane's father, Donald, is an air traffic controller at the local airport, and the grief of his daughter's death pulls him so far apart that he loses focus at his job. And under his shaking, broken oversight, 2 passenger planes collide in midair over Albuquerque, raining wreckage and bodies down across Walt's neighborhood. A pink teddy bear with one charred eye missing lands in Walt's swimming pool, slowly turning in the chlorine. And that image becomes the visual signature of Walter White's slow descent into hell. 167 people are dead. None of them know who Walter White is, but Walter White knows that he caused this. Not directly, not deliberately, But through a chain of selfish, self-protective little choices, he is the reason a man missed a routine instruction and a sky full of people fell on his neighborhood. And he keeps that secret. He keeps it forever. He keeps it through every cancer scare, every family fight, every cookout with Hank, every birthday cake with Walter Jr. He keeps it through everything. The first man we met, the meek and humble teacher in the pilot, would have shattered under the weight of it. The man Walt is becoming just folds it up and tucks it into the same drawer where he keeps the rest of his sins. This is where Walter White stops being a man who is doing bad things and becomes a man who is choosing to be bad. The difference is subtle, but it is everything. Crazy 8 was survival. Jane was choice. And once you make that choice, the next one gets easier. And the next one. And the next one. And eventually you start making them so quickly you do not even feel yourself making them anymore. His personal life implodes around the same time. Skylar finally puts the pieces together. The gambling story does not hold. She tracks down inconsistencies. She starts asking questions Walt cannot answer. She does her own digging. She visits the school. She visits the car wash. She visits a former coworker of his. She gets close enough to the edge of the truth that the rest of it fills itself in. And finally, exhausted and disgusted, she demands he leave the house. She is done. She does not know everything he has done. Not the killings, not the bodies, not what happened in the sky over the city. But she knows that the man she married is gone. And she knows that what is left in his place has been lying to her for the entire year. Walt moves into a sad little bachelor apartment, gets served with divorce papers, and watches his entire stated reason for doing all of this slip through his fingers. His family, the family he supposedly built this empire to protect, has thrown him out. And his response, deep down, is not to repent. It is to get bigger. It is to make so much money, accumulate so much power, that they will have to take him back. To prove them all wrong, to prove the world wrong, to prove the universe wrong, for ever doubting Walter Hartwell White. Enter Gustavo Fring. If Tuco Salamanca was a tornado, Gustavo Fring is a glacier. Cold, slow, inevitable. Crushing everything in its path with a patience that borders on religious. To the public, Gus is the wholesome, hard-working owner of a fast food fried chicken chain called Los Pollos Hermanos, a respected community member who hands out scholarships and stands next to the DEA at fundraisers and smiles modestly when the cameras come close. To the people who know the truth, he is the highest-level meth distributor in the entire American Southwest, a former Chilean expat with a deep private grudge against the Salamanca family that goes back decades. And one of the most patient, methodical, terrifying murderers you will ever meet on screen. Walt is introduced to Gus by his slimy, fast-talking, eternally hustling lawyer, Saul Goodman. Saul, real name Jimmy McGill, but that is a different story for a different show, takes on Walt and Jesse as clients fairly early in their criminal career after a chaotic incident involving one of Jesse's friends, a young dealer named Badger, getting picked up by an undercover cop with a baggie of blue meth. Saul handles the situation by suggesting they kill an inmate named Jimmy In and Out as a replacement plea, then walks it back to something more reasonable, and through this absurd negotiation, he basically becomes their permanent fixer. Saul has a strip mall office with a Constitution backdrop and a fleet of cheap television commercials. He calls himself a criminal lawyer in two different senses of the phrase, and from the moment he meets Walt, he sees something the other characters in Walt's life do not see yet. He sees a guy with talent, a guy with potential, a guy who could be a real player if he stopped thinking small. Saul starts trying to upgrade them. He sees that Walt's product is too good to be wasted in low-level street operations. He puts Walt in touch with Gus through a series of careful, blind introductions. The first time Walt actually meets Gus, Gus is dressed as a kindly old store manager at Los Pollos Hermanos, refilling drinks and asking customers how they are enjoying their meals. Walt does not even recognize him as the man he is there to meet. They sit down. Gus looks at Walt with a small, polite smile and tells him that he does not see what he was promised he would see. Because what he was promised was a careful man, and Walter White has just brought his glassy-eyed, strung-out partner, Jesse Pinkman, to a meeting with the most cautious drug lord in 3 states. Gus walks away. No deal. Walt is humiliated. He sits at the table alone, ears ringing, watching Gus walk back to the kitchen like nothing happened. And so begins one of the great corporate auditions in television. Walt has to prove he is worth the risk. He has to prove he is not just a meth cook, but a serious operator. He gets the chance when Gus reluctantly hires him to produce a large quantity of meth on a tight deadline, almost as a final test. And Walt pulls it off, just barely, by ditching Jesse and cooking under impossible conditions, with no support and no real equipment in a beat-up RV. The product is so good, Gus has to acknowledge it. And so Gus makes Walt an offer that breaks Walt's brain wide open. $3 million, 3 months of his time, to cook in a state-of-the-art underground laboratory beneath an industrial laundry facility, with every safety measure, every piece of equipment, every comfort he could possibly want, including a coffee machine that costs more than his car. $3 million for 3 months of doing the one thing he is best at in the world. Walt almost says no. Almost. He gets in his car after the meeting, drives a little ways, parks in a lot, and picks up the phone to call Skylar. He is ready in this small moment to come clean, to tell her everything, to walk away, to take the cancer remission as the gift it is and try to put his life back together. And then he overhears 2 of his old colleagues from a previous life chatting at the next aisle of a hardware store about Gretchen and Elliot Schwartz and the latest Forbes profile on gray matter. And right there, in that parking lot, he sets the phone down. He starts the car. He drives back to Los Pollos Hermanos. He sits down across from Gus, and he says yes. Yes to $3 million. Yes to a state-of-the-art lab. Yes to becoming a full-time meth producer for the largest drug operation in the region. Because every time the world reminds him of his old defeat, he chooses to climb higher rather than walk away. Every time. Without fail. That is the engine room of Walter White. That is the algorithm. That is the loop. The Superlab is a thing of beauty. Stainless steel surfaces, industrial ventilation, massive copper kettles, state-of-the-art measuring equipment. A space so clean and well lit that Walt looks like he is standing inside an enormous luxury watch. And the man who runs the lab alongside him, who Gus assigns as his cooking partner, is one of the quietly most tragic figures in the entire show. His name is Gale Bedecker. Gale is a sweet, awkward, deeply nerdy chemist who reads poetry and brews artisanal coffee using a homemade vacuum siphon setup and listens to opera while he works. He sings karaoke alone in his apartment to old Italian songs and folk tunes. He has a vast collection of strange knickknacks. He genuinely admires Walt. He looks at Walt the way Walt has always wished people would look at him, like a master craftsman, like a hero, like a teacher worth quoting. Under any other circumstances, the 2 of them could have been friends. 2 science nerds with a shared love for the elegance of pure chemistry. Under these circumstances, Gale's existence is a problem. Because Gale is good. Gale is very, very good. He is not Walt's level, but he is good enough that he could probably learn Walt's recipe by watching, given enough time. And the moment Gale becomes good enough to run the lab on his own, Walter White becomes disposable. Gus is patient, but he is not sentimental. The second Walt can be replaced, he will be replaced. And replaced in this business means killed. Because the retirement packages here tend to involve shallow graves. Walt figures this out faster than Gale figures it out. He starts being subtly unhelpful with Gale. He stops explaining the trickier steps. He grumbles. He makes Gale feel small enough to ask for a transfer back to a smaller lab. Gus reassigns Gale, and Walt brings Jesse in as his new lab partner, against Gus's wishes, mostly to make himself harder to replace. In the middle of all this, Walt has a separate ongoing problem: the Salamanca cousins. Two cold, silent, almost identical assassins named Lionel and Marco, who are the next generation of the Salamanca cartel after Tuco's death. Hector, the bell-ringing old man in the wheelchair, blames Walt for Tuco's death. He has communicated this to the cousins through whatever silent family channel still works for him, and the cousins have come north into the United States to kill Walt. They are introduced in one of the most haunting cold opens of the show, where they are crawling on their elbows across a dirt floor in Mexico toward a shrine of a hooded figure that the cartel reveres, in a kind of ritual pilgrimage to ask for the strength to murder. They wear identical silver-tipped boots. They carry an axe. They do not speak for the entire arc except a handful of words. Gus, who is playing his own much longer game against the entire Salamanca family, redirects the cousins. He cannot let them kill Walt because he needs Walt's chemistry, and he cannot tell them no openly because he has to maintain the cartel alliance. So in a masterstroke of misdirection, he offers them Hank as a replacement target. Hank, the DEA agent who actually pulled the trigger on Tuco. He gives them the address, he times the hit, and the cousins, satisfied, go after Hank instead. What follows is one of the most ferocious shootout scenes in modern television. Hank is alone in a parking lot, trying to get into his car. He gets a mysterious phone call warning him he has 60 seconds to live, an anonymous warning from Gus's organization designed to give Hank a fighting chance. He turns. The cousins are walking toward him with shotguns and a silver-tipped axe. Hank fights for his life. He gets hit badly multiple times. One of the cousins puts a hollow-point shotgun shell into the chamber to finish him off. But in the chaos, Hank manages to grab his own pistol, fall back into his car, and shoot the cousin in the head as he raises the axe. The other cousin he wounds badly enough to take down. Hank survives, bleeding out, half-conscious, the entire parking lot covered in glass and shell casings and his own blood. He spends weeks in the hospital. His legs are temporarily paralyzed. His marriage to Marie strains under the weight of his recovery and his refusal to do physical therapy. He becomes bitter and short-tempered and tries to find any small thing in his life that he can still do, eventually retreating into the hobby of collecting and grading minerals, which his nephew Walter Jr., in one of the most quietly affectionate gags in the show, keeps calling rocks, which sends Hank into an exasperated lecture every single time. Minerals, Marie, minerals. Hank is broken, but he is alive. And in the long term, he is more determined than ever to bring down the meth empire in his region, even if he does not yet know the empire is sitting across the dinner table from him. Walt, meanwhile, learns from Saul that he was the original target. He learns it from Mike, Gus's old hitter and cleaner, an aging, dryly funny, devastatingly competent older man who at this point Walt has only seen a few times, but who is going to become one of the most important and most morally interesting figures in his life. Mike, dispassionately, lets Walt know that he was set up to be killed by the cousins, that Gus redirected them to Hank instead, and that this means Gus has bought Walt some time, but no more than that. The danger is everywhere. Walt is now a man with a target painted on his back in 2 different colors. And the show takes a moment here to give us Gus Fring's backstory in a way that lets you understand the patience of this man. We learn through flashbacks that Gus had a business partner once, a beloved younger friend named Maximino Arciniega, whom he brought to Mexico decades ago to negotiate a deal with the Salamanca cartel and their boss, Don Eladio. The negotiations went poorly. Don Eladio, to assert dominance, had Hector Salamanca shoot Maximino dead at his own poolside, in front of Gus, in front of everyone. And the blood from Max's head ran into the perfect blue water of that pool, while Don Eladio sipped his drink and laughed. Gus has been waiting 20 years to get even. 20 years. He has built an empire, accumulated a fortune, ingratiated himself with the very cartel he plans to destroy, and crafted a slow, methodical plan to wipe Don Eladio and every Salamanca off the face of the earth. The man is not just dangerous, he is a one-man Old Testament prophecy. Walt is just a piece on this much larger board, and he does not realize how small a piece he is until much later. In the meantime, the relationship between Walt and Jesse hits one of its lowest points in a sequence that is, oddly, also one of its quietest. Walt becomes convinced that a contamination has gotten into the super lab, a fly. A single fly buzzing around the equipment. He spends an entire episode hunting it, sleep-deprived, exhausted, refusing to cook until it is dead, while Jesse tries to humor him. And in the middle of this absurd manhunt, the two of them have a stripped-down late-night conversation, sitting on the floor in the lab, where Walt almost confesses to what happened with Jane. He talks around it. He talks about timing. He talks about a perfect moment to die, a moment when he should have left this world clean, before all of this, before so much of what came after. Jesse listens, half asleep, half curious, not quite understanding what Walt is reaching toward. And Walt never quite says it. He almost crosses that line and pulls back. But the audience sees the moment. The audience knows what he is dancing around. It is the closest he ever comes to actually telling Jesse what he did. And from there, the lie sits between them, growing in the dark. Around the same time, Skylar discovers everything. Not because Walt confesses, but because she finally puts the pieces together, asks the right questions, and listens to her gut. The cancer treatment was supposedly paid for by Gretchen and Elliot. She calls Gretchen to thank her again. Gretchen has no idea what she is talking about. The whole story collapses in one phone call. Skylar goes home, sits across from her husband at the kitchen table, and looks at him with the eyes of a person who has decided to no longer be lied to. She asks him, very plainly, what he is. And Walt, exhausted and cornered, finally, partially admits it. He cooks meth. He sells it. He has been doing it for the better part of a year. He is doing it for the family. He is doing it for them. It is the speech he has rehearsed in his head 100 times. It is the speech he believes in his bones. Skylar does not cry. Skylar does not yell. Skylar tells him to leave. She tells him that if he ever wants to see his daughter again, he will leave quietly and he will sign the papers when they come, and he will not contest anything. He moves out into a sad little condo with no furniture, sits on the floor eating cereal out of a paper cup, and stares at the wall. But Walt cannot accept this. The family is his stated reason. The family is the whole point. If the family is gone, then everything he has done is a list of crimes with no defense. So he begins his slow, ugly, deeply gross campaign to win Skylar back, which involves moving back into the house against her will, refusing to leave, daring her to call the police on him, because he knows that if the police come, she has to explain why he is being kicked out, and that opens doors she has been carefully keeping closed. He weaponizes her own knowledge against her. He uses her status as an accomplice to lock her in place. Skylar, in response, retreats inward. She starts an affair with her old boss, Ted Beneke, a smiling, weak-chinned middle manager type who Walt despises on sight. The affair is not really about love. It is about revenge, and about control, and about Skylar reclaiming any tiny piece of her life that does not have Walter White's fingerprints on it. The affair, when Walt discovers it, almost breaks him in a way nothing else has. He shows up at a school open house with cuts and bruises on his face from getting into a bar fight he started just to feel something. He flirts inappropriately with the principal. He misbehaves in public. He is, for the first time, allowing the cracks to show outside of the lab. And he is, as always, climbing further down the staircase he keeps insisting is going up. When Gale gets called back to the lab to replace Walt, when Gus finally decides that the time has come, Walt understands he has hours, maybe a day at most, before he is dead. So he makes the call that is, in many ways, the call that defines him forever. He tells Jesse to kill Gale. He tells Jesse there is no other way. He calls him from the back of a car driven by Mike, having been picked up at the lab in what is clearly a trip to his own execution.
He pleads with Jesse to do it now, before it is too late, before Gale becomes the new cook and Walt becomes the dead one. And Jesse, who at this point in the story has been pulled in 100 different directions and has lost too much and seen too much, agrees. He stands outside Gale's apartment in the dark, with a gun he barely knows how to use, and when Gale opens the door, Jesse points the gun at him. Gale, this sweet, weird, harmless little chemist who quotes Walt Whitman and brews specialty coffee, looks at this strange kid in his hallway and tears well up in his eyes, and he says nothing because there is nothing to say. And Jesse pulls the trigger. He pulls it because he loves Walt in his broken way. He pulls it because Walt told him there was no other way. He pulls it because Walt is the only family he has left who has not given up on him. He pulls it, and Gale is dead. Jesse murders Gale Bedecker, and the camera holds on Jesse's face as it happens, and Jesse will carry that one for the rest of his life. He will carry it through dreams and rehabs and rivers and silences. He will carry it through the rest of Breaking Bad and into the events of El Camino. He will carry it forever. And Walt is the reason. Walt told him there was no other way. Walt sent him there. Walt manipulated a kid he claims to love into killing a man who had never hurt anybody. And from that point on, every time Walt tells himself he is a good man, every time he tells the audience he did it for his family, you have to remember Gale. You have to remember Jane. You have to remember Crazy 8. The pile is growing, and Walt is not looking at the pile. The fallout with Gus from Gale's death is exactly what you would expect. Gus is furious. He does not lose his composure visibly, because Gus never loses his composure visibly, but his eyes go to a place you do not want to live. Walt is alive only because Gus still needs him to keep cooking, but Gus has decided to start over with a fresh team. He has new candidates, new chemists, new plans. He has Walt's days numbered down to the minute, and in one of the most terrifying scenes in the entire series, Gus drives Walt out into the open desert, walks him up onto a cliff edge, and tells him in that quiet, almost gentle voice that he is no longer required, that he is to leave the lab forever, that he is to leave Albuquerque, that he is never to contact Jesse again, and that if he or his family interferes with the operation in any way, he will kill Walt's wife, his son, even his infant daughter, no matter where they hide. You see the difference between Tuco and Gus right there. Tuco was lightning. Gus is gravity. The threat is so flat, so measured, so absolutely believable that you feel Walt's blood freeze right through the screen. And Gus drives away, leaving Walt on the cliff in the wind, the message delivered. But Walt is not in a position to walk away. He has Jesse, who is becoming Gus's prized new partner, slowly drifting out of Walt's orbit and into Gus's. He has Hank, who has been investigating a mysterious blue meth in his region and is starting to circle the truth without realizing how close he is. He has Skylar, who has decided to fully back his criminal enterprise on the laundering side, mostly because she has decided that the only way out for the family is through, and she would rather drive the bus than be tied to the bumper. And he has, deep in his chest, a thing that has finally, fully woken up. Heisenberg is not a hat and a pair of sunglasses anymore. Heisenberg is the dominant operating system. Walter White is no longer a teacher pretending to be a criminal. He is a criminal pretending to be a teacher. And the longer the season goes on, the worse the pretense gets. What follows is one of the most beautifully tense chess matches in television history. Walt slowly works to turn Jesse against Gus. He needs Jesse's loyalty back, but more than that, he needs Jesse to be willing to help him kill Gus. And he understands, with the cold strategic clarity of a man who has stopped caring about how he gets what he wants, that the only way to do that is to make Jesse think Gus has done something unforgivable. So Walt does something so unforgivable, so utterly damning, that it would be the moral end of any other protagonist on any other show. He poisons a child. Specifically, he poisons a 6-year-old boy named Brock, the son of Jesse's girlfriend, Andrea, a kind young woman from Jesse's old recovery group who has been trying her best to keep her son safe in a neighborhood that does not make safety easy. Jesse loves Brock like his own. He is a stand-in father, a goofy older brother, the kind of presence in that little boy's life that Brock genuinely lights up around. And Walt, in a calculation so cold it does not even register on a normal thermometer, slips a poison from his garden, a berry from a lily-of-the-valley plant growing in a pot in his backyard, into something Brock eats. Then he lets Jesse find out the boy has been poisoned. Then he lets Jesse blame Gus for it. He pulls Jesse back onto his side by manipulating his love for a child he himself secretly hurt. The poison Walt uses is not ricin, by the way, which is the misdirect. Walt famously has a vial of ricin that he has been keeping around for use on various enemies, and Jesse jumps to the conclusion that Gus must have stolen the ricin and used it on Brock. Walt counts on this leap. He helps it along. The actual poison is from the plant in his backyard, and the camera, in a moment that drops your stomach through the floor, lingers on that plant at the very end of the season, after Brock has fallen ill, after Jesse has been pulled back into Walt's orbit, after the plan against Gus has been set in motion. The reveal is silent, just a slow camera tilt to a flower pot, and every viewer in the world realizing simultaneously that Walt did it. Walt did it. Walter White poisoned a child to manipulate his partner. That happened. He really did. And the worst part, the absolute hold-your-stomach part, is that it works. Jesse comes back to Walt's side. The plan moves forward. Walt and Jesse coordinate with Hector Salamanca, Tuco's stroke-paralyzed uncle, who at this point has been moved into a nursing home in Albuquerque, and who hates Gus more than he hates anything else in the world because of the decades-old grudge that involves a dead family member. Hector is confined to a wheelchair. He communicates only with that little silver bell. He cannot speak. He cannot move below the neck. He agrees, after the most awful set of conversations involving an eye-blink alphabet, to wear a pipe bomb under his wheelchair that will go off when Gus comes to gloat over him. Hector would rather die destroying his enemy than live one more day knowing his enemy walks free. He hates Gus enough to give up the small, bitter life he has left. The bomb is built by Walt himself in his old kitchen. The meeting is engineered through careful manipulation involving the DEA, who Walt makes sure visits the nursing home to question Hector under Gus's watchful eye. Gus comes to the nursing home in person to make sure Hector has not spoken. He thinks Hector is too proud to ever talk to the DEA. He is right, but he is also wrong about everything else. Gus walks up to Hector's wheelchair. He lectures the silent, hateful old man in the chair, telling him that everyone he loves is gone, that he is the last Salamanca, that his name will die with him in this room. He prepares to give Hector a lethal injection as a final triumph. And then Hector lifts his eyes, and he begins to ring the bell. Faster, louder, furious, eyes locked on Gus. And Gus, in the last second of his life, finally understands. He reaches for the chair to stop the ringing, but the bomb goes off, and the entire room explodes in dust and fire and shrapnel. Gus walks out of the smoke into the hallway. He straightens his tie. He smooths the lapels of his suit. The camera pans around to show that half of his face has been blown clean off, the skull beneath his cheek exposed, the side of his head a ragged red and gray hole. And then he falls, dead. In one of the most operatic, gruesome, unforgettable images in the history of television. Walt has won. He has killed Gus Fring. He has killed the biggest, most dangerous criminal in the entire region. He has done what no one, including Hank's DEA, has been able to do for years. And he stands on the roof of an apartment building across town, calls Skylar on the phone, and tells her, in a voice trembling with adrenaline and pride, that they are safe and that he has won. He says those two words. He says them in a tone you do not forget, and the look on his face is something I want you to remember for what is coming, because it is not relief, it is not joy, it is victory. Pure, ugly, unfiltered victory. He is no longer a man trying to survive. He is a man enjoying the fact that he keeps winning. The fallout from Gus's death is enormous. Walt and Jesse return to the superlab in the dead of night and burn it to the ground to destroy the evidence, in a beautifully shot scene where the two of them watch their old kingdom go up in flames through a wall of glass. Gus's organization scatters, his distribution network fragments. The blue meth, briefly, disappears from the streets. And in the wreckage, Walt finally tells Skylar, in one of the most uncomfortable monologues of their entire marriage, that the danger is gone, that she should not be afraid of the men knocking on the door, because he is the one who knocks. It is the line everyone quotes. It is the line that gets printed on t-shirts and posters and bumper stickers. But the way the show frames it, with Skylar staring at him with this growing horror, this realization that the husband she married is gone and a stranger is wearing his face, you understand that the line is not a triumph. It is a confession. He is not telling her he is safe. He is telling her he is the worst thing in her life, and she should be terrified of him too. The next chapter of Walt's life is the part where he tries to build his own empire. Free from Gus, free from a boss, free from anyone who can tell him no. He partners with Mike Ehrmantraut, Gus's old hitter and cleaner, the grizzled, dryly funny, devastatingly competent older man we mentioned earlier. Mike does not like Walt. Mike correctly identified Walt very early on as a self-destructive ego in a sweater vest, a man who is going to get everybody killed because his pride is bigger than his common sense. But Mike has bills. Mike has a granddaughter named Kaylee, whom he has been quietly setting up for life. Mike has a list of 9 men, his old guys from Gus's organization, sitting in prison and being paid hush money out of an offshore account. And that money has been frozen by the DEA after Gus's death. Mike needs cash flow. So Mike grits his teeth and agrees to work with Walt, even though every conversation between them is essentially Mike trying to keep Walt from setting the world on fire. Jesse also is back at Walt's side. Wounded, broken, suspicious of his own suspicions, but back. He still has not put together everything Walt has done. He still loves the man on some animal level he cannot really explain. He still calls him Mr. White, like a kid talking to a teacher. He is also developing slowly into a more competent operator on his own, even if his soul is hollowing out a little more with every passing week. The new operation involves a fascinating new wrinkle, which is one of the more delightful inventions in the show. Walt, Jesse, Mike, and a junior partner named Todd Alquist cook inside private homes that get fumigated by a tent company called Vamonos Pest. They roll into a house in the morning, drape the fumigation tent over the roof to mask the chemical smell of the cook, set up a portable lab, cook for the day, break it down, and roll out by nightfall. It is elegant. It is efficient. And it is a beautiful little nod to how Walt's brain works when it is at its best, before his ego ruins everything. They also need methylamine, the precursor chemical they used to get from Gus's organized pipeline. Without methylamine, the recipe does not work. And so the team plans to pull off one of the most thrilling sequences in the entire series: a heist of a freight train. The train heist is a thing of pure television beauty. Walt and Jesse and Todd and Saul's two muscle guys, Kubi and Huel, intercept a freight train as it crosses through a remote stretch of New Mexico desert. They have done their homework. They know the train carries one massive tanker car full of methylamine that comes through this stretch on a specific day every couple of weeks. They block the train's path with a man pretending to have engine trouble, hop up onto the methylamine car, drill into the tank from above with a hose, drain 1,000 gallons of methylamine into a tanker they have buried in the dirt, and replace the equal weight with water so that nobody at the receiving end notices the discrepancy. The water level, the weight, the seal, every detail is calibrated. Jesse, who designed most of the plan, is glowing through it. He is brilliant in this moment, sharp and creative and proud of what he is pulling off. And they do it. They actually do it. The train pulls away from the spot, none the wiser. Walt and Jesse and Todd are standing in the middle of the desert, laughing, screaming, hugging, riding the high of a perfect plan executed without a single hitch. And then a little boy on a dirt bike rides over the hill. He is curious. He stopped because of the noise. He has been out exploring. He is holding a glass jar with a tarantula in it that he was planning to take home with him, and he is looking right at the three of them with wide, innocent eyes. Mike had warned them, no witnesses, ever. Walt and Jesse stand there frozen, not sure what to do, and Jesse, sweet, broken Jesse, raises a hand in a friendly wave. Maybe he can play it off. Maybe the kid will not think anything of it. Maybe everyone walks away from this. And then, Todd raises his pistol and shoots the boy off his dirt bike like he is swatting a fly. The kid is dead before he hits the ground. His name was Drew Sharp. He was 14 years old, and he is the body that finally cracks Jesse Pinkman down the middle. The earlier deaths, Combo, Tomas, the previous bodies that Jesse has had to absorb, all of it has been gnawing at him for years. But the murder of a child, an innocent kid who just rode his bike over the wrong hill at the wrong time, is the line Jesse cannot uncross. He walks out of the partnership not long after. He wants no part of any of it. He just wants his share of the money so he can run somewhere and try to forget every single thing he has ever done. Walt will not let him go. Walt cannot let him go, because part of Walt loves Jesse in a horrible, twisted, possessive way. Jesse is the only person in the world who knows who Walt really is. Jesse is the surrogate son, the protege, the witness. And Walt is also terrified that Jesse, broken and unstable and full of secrets, might say the wrong thing to the wrong person. So he tries to keep him close, tries to manipulate him back in, tries to talk him down. And Jesse, exhausted and grieving and unwilling to be sucked back in for one more job, lets Walt buy out his share of the methylamine in a complicated negotiation involving a rival distributor named Declan from Phoenix. Walt is so attached to his ego at this point that he cannot bring himself to take the simple buyout money. He insists on going into business with Declan, supplying him with cooking equipment and methylamine. He insists on keeping his brand alive. He insists on being Heisenberg. Mike, meanwhile, has his own falling out with Walt that builds across these same weeks. Walt cannot stand the idea of paying off Mike's legacy guys, those 9 men in prison who need ongoing payments to stay quiet. Walt wants the names so he can cut them off himself, or worse, neutralize them. Mike refuses. They argue. It escalates, and in a moment that ranks among the saddest, most pointless killings of the entire series, Walt shoots Mike. Walt confronts him in a parking lot near a river, demands the list of names again. Mike tells him to walk away, and Walt, in a flash of pride and rage and impatience, pulls a pistol and shoots Mike in the gut on a public sidewalk like an angry teenager. Mike, hit and bleeding, manages to drive himself a short distance away to a riverbank. He sits down by the water as the sun goes down, blood pooling in his lap, watching the wind move across the surface. Walt finds him there. He tries to apologize. He tries to explain. He tries to soften the moment. And Mike, with his last few breaths, looks at him and tells Walt, in the tiredest possible voice, to please shut up and let him die in peace. Just for a few minutes. Just for once. Let me have this. It is one of the most devastating moments in the show. Mike was right about Walt from the very first scene they shared together. Mike saw what Walt was. Mike tried to keep Walt in check, and Mike still died because of Walt's pride. Mike died because Walt could not stand being told there was something he could not have. Mike died for absolutely nothing. And Walt, in the immediate aftermath, even has the audacity to mutter something almost like a footnote to himself, that he could have gotten the names another way, that he did not need to do any of that. It is almost a joke, a bitter, sick little joke. He killed Mike for information he did not need to kill him to get. Mike's body is buried by a contact Walt arranges. The Legacy Guys, in a sequence that is one of the most chilling pieces of editing in the entire series, are dispatched in a coordinated 2-minute hit across 3 separate prison facilities by Todd's uncle Jack Welker, a neo-Nazi gang leader Walt has been working with as outside muscle. 10 men killed by shanks and burnings, all timed to a perfect window, all so the names of those men never end up in front of a federal grand jury. Walt watches the news coverage from his living room afterward with a glass of water in his hand, listening to the death toll, his face completely empty. He says nothing to Skyler. He just keeps watching. Lydia Rodarte Quayle becomes Walt's new distribution partner around this time. Lydia is a brittle, ambitious, deeply nervous woman who works at the corporate side of Madrigal Electromotive, the multinational company that secretly fronts a huge portion of the European meth pipeline. She is the one who has been supplying the methylamine, the one who handles the international logistics. She is afraid of everything, and yet she keeps making the bold moves anyway. She and Walt strike a deal to get the blue meth across the ocean and into a much larger market than Walt has ever had access to. The money becomes, frankly, insane. Walt builds up so much cash he cannot physically store it anymore. There is a stack of it the size of a small car under a tarp in a storage unit. So much money that Skyler, who has been quietly handling the laundering side, walks Walt into the unit one day, pulls the tarp back, and shows him this mountain of physical paper. She tells him she has no clue how much there actually is. She tells him she stopped counting weeks ago. She tells him there is more than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. She tells him she just wants her kids back. She wants the lie to end. She wants the cancer to win quickly or the operation to wind down. She does not even know which she wants more. And that is what is killing her. And here, briefly, Walter White almost stops. This is one of the most fascinating little branches in his entire arc. He sees the cash. He sees the exhaustion. He sees his family. His son is healthy. His daughter is a sweet little baby. The cancer is in remission. He has more money than any reasonable human being could spend in a single lifetime. And his wife is, for the first time in years, looking at him with something resembling hope that he might finally walk away. So he tells Skyler, looking out at his pool one quiet afternoon, that he is out. He is done. He is finished. He is going to leave the business behind and go back to being just Walt. Heisenberg is retired. He goes back to his family. He starts attending Walter Jr.'s track meets and helping him with his homework. They have barbecues. They invite Hank and Marie over. It looks, for one fragile sliver of time, like the show might end here. Like Walt might actually pull off the impossible and survive his own ego. And then Hank goes to the bathroom. One of the most famous bathroom trips in the entire history of television. Hank is at Walt's house for a backyard barbecue. He is having a great afternoon. He has wandered into the bathroom, sat down on the toilet, and started idly thumbing through a book left on the small shelf beside the toilet. It is a copy of Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. Inside the front cover, there is an inscription, handwritten, a small note from someone named GB to my other favorite, WW. The note refers to the recipient as a star, mentions a quiet, poetic compliment, and is signed with affectionate initials. And Hank, sitting on that toilet, stares at that inscription. He thinks back to a case he worked, to a murdered chemist named Gail Boddicker, whose case file Hank reviewed in his time on the meth investigation. He remembers a notebook of Gail's that referenced an admired colleague by the initials WW. At the time, Hank had assumed it was just a poetic reference, Walt Whitman, or even Werner Heisenberg. He had written it off as nothing, but now, sitting in Walt's own bathroom, looking at Walt's own copy of Whitman, with the same poet, with what looks like the same handwriting, with the same initials, the pieces snap into place all at once. Hank Schrader realizes, in the most boring, banal, mundane setting imaginable, that his brother-in-law, the meek high school chemistry teacher he has been pitying for 2 seasons, is Heisenberg. He walks out of that bathroom a different man. He drives home in stunned silence. He starts having panic attacks behind the wheel and pulls over on the side of the road, gripping his steering wheel until his knuckles go white. He cannot believe it, cannot accept it, cannot fit the puzzle into the shape of his life. The man he has been hunting, the meth kingpin that ruined his career, the case that nearly killed him in a parking lot, has been sitting across from him at every Thanksgiving. He has been drinking Walt's beer. He has been laughing at Walt's jokes. He has been the one Walt smiled politely at while pretending to be a humble nobody. And on top of the rage and the disbelief and the betrayal, Hank cannot tell anyone. Because if it ever came out that his own brother-in-law was the biggest drug lord in the Southwest, his entire career, his entire identity would be destroyed. So Hank does what Hank always does. He starts investigating. In secret, on his own, in the privacy of his own garage. He sets up a corkboard with photos and string. He pulls case files. He requests records. He looks for inconsistencies. He listens to old interrogation tapes. And then, after weeks of slow, careful building, he finally confronts Walt in his own garage. Just the two of them. No witnesses, no badges, no DEA. And Hank looks Walt in the eye and tells him he knows everything, and that the best thing Walt can do for the people who still love him is turn himself in. To do the right thing for once in his sorry life. And Walt looks back at him with eyes that have nothing left of the chemistry teacher in them, and tells Hank, in a voice as flat as a slab of stone, that if he is smart, he will tread very lightly. That is the moment. That is the moment Walter White and Hank Schrader become enemies. Family ends in that one little exchange. The next time these two are alone in a room together, somebody is not coming out alive. What follows is a beautifully constructed cat and mouse game that Walt is genuinely terrified by. Because Hank is not the cartel. Hank is not Gus Fring. Hank is family. Hank's wife Marie is Skylar's sister. The kids are cousins. The Thanksgivings are shared. And the second Hank moves on him publicly, the entire family detonates. Walt has built his entire twisted internal mythology around the idea that he is doing this for his family. And if his family is the cost of his survival, the lie collapses in real time. Skylar, in this part of the show, has finally been broken open by the whole truth. She knows everything. She has known for a while. She has been doing her best to keep her head above water, laundering money through a car wash that she and Walt now own, smiling at customers, raising her kids, and trying not to look in mirrors. When Walt comes home from one round of his cat and mouse game with Hank and tells her, almost as an afterthought, that his cancer has come back, she barely reacts. She has been hollowed out. She is so tired of him that the threat of his death feels almost theoretical at this point. She does not believe in him anymore. She does not believe in anything anymore. Hank tells Marie everything. Marie, who has been a kleptomaniac with a flair for the dramatic and a deep love for the color purple, takes the news the way only Marie can. She comes over and tries to take baby Holly out of the house. She tells Skylar that Skylar cannot keep her children in this poison, that Walt is a monster and Skylar is an accomplice, and Marie is going to take Holly somewhere safe right now. Skylar, who has been holding everything together with paper clips and willpower and clenched teeth, finally breaks. She refuses. She fights Marie off in her own kitchen, gets the baby back, and when Marie leaves crying, Skylar crumbles to the floor. Walt makes his next play. He records a confession tape. But it is not what you think. It is a deliberate, calculated, brilliantly manipulative piece of misdirection. Walt records himself confessing everything, except the confession he records frames Hank as the criminal mastermind and Walt as the terrified, coerced civilian who is forced to cook meth under the threat of his brother-in-law. He gives the tape to Hank and Marie. He tells them, in essence, that if Hank ever moves against him publicly, this is what the world will hear. Walt has also already documented payments from his drug money to Hank's hospital bills when Hank was recovering from the cousin's shooting. To the outside world, especially after editing, Hank looks dirty. Walt looks clean. The confession tape is a nuclear weapon Walt is holding to his brother-in-law's head, and Hank knows it. Hank's marriage is on edge. His career is on edge. His sanity is on edge. He is operating on his own, off the books, without backup, against a man he used to share holiday dinners with. And then Jesse Pinkman, broken and lost and finally ready to burn it all down, walks into his crosshairs. Jesse at this point has been spiraling. He tried to give away millions of dollars to his old friends and to random strangers in poor neighborhoods, just to be rid of it, just to wash his hands of what it represents. The DEA found him with the cash, threw him in a holding cell. Walt and Saul bailed him out. Saul has been trying to push Jesse to leave town, to vanish completely, to hire an off-the-books fixer Saul knows as the vacuum repair guy, who provides new identities for people willing to leave their old lives behind forever. Jesse has been pulled in a dozen different directions, but the truth has been sitting at the bottom of his stomach the entire time. He suspects Walt of poisoning Brock. He has suspected it for a long time, and he has tried to bury that suspicion. And then a small detail breaks the dam. He realizes that the ricin cigarette he kept hidden in a small pouch was lifted out of his pocket months earlier by Saul's bodyguard Huel on Walt's orders. He puts together that Walt set him up, that Walt has been manipulating him this entire time, that his old teacher, the man he has been calling Mr. White like a child for years, poisoned a 6-year-old boy to keep him in line. Jesse storms into Saul's office, beats the lawyer with his fists, demands to know where Walt is. He drives to Walt's house with a can of gasoline and starts pouring it on the floors. He is going to burn the entire house to the ground, every wall, every memory, every photo. Hank, who has been listening to all of this unfold over a wire on Saul, races over to Walt's house and tackles Jesse off the floor before he can drop a match. He looks at this strung-out, desperate kid in Walt's living room and realizes that this kid, this 20-something former student of Walt's, is the most powerful weapon he could possibly have. Jesse knows where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. Jesse can put Walt away for the rest of his natural life. So Hank brings Jesse in, very quietly, off the books, to his own home, against Marie's wishes. Hank and his partner Stephen Gomez, a DEA agent who has been one of Hank's only trusted confidants throughout this whole investigation, plan to use Jesse to draw Walt out. They cook up a story that Jesse has found one of Walt's buried barrels of money in the desert and is going to burn it. Walt has buried 7 plastic barrels of cash out in a remote stretch of the desert, in coordinates only he knows. Jesse calls Walt and tells him he has found a barrel, and he is going to start burning his money 1 barrel at a time until Walt comes out to stop him. Walt panics.
Walt drives out into the desert in his car, ranting and raving over the phone, slipping into the kind of breakdown only a man with too much pride can have. He spills everything in his fury, including details that put nooses around his own neck if anyone is listening. And someone is listening. Hank and Gomez are recording the whole thing. When Walt gets to the GPS coordinates of his buried money, when he gets out of his car expecting to find Jesse next to a flaming pile of cash, he realizes he has been tricked. There is no Jesse. There is no fire. There is no need for him to be out here. And then he calls his connection of last resort. A man we have seen building up in the background of the season, Jack Welker, the neo-Nazi gang leader who runs his own small meth operation alongside his nephew Todd, the same Todd who shot Drew Sharp off the dirt bike. Walt has been using Jack's gang to murder people for him, including the legacy guys of Mike's, and Jack has been holding Walt to a promise to teach his nephew how to cook the blue meth recipe. Walt calls Jack now, frantic, and tells him there is a target on the way out into the desert, an off-the-books DEA agent and a former informant. He tells him to come quickly. Then his phone rings. Hank and Gomez are pulling up in their car. They have him surrounded. He sits in the dirt next to his car, defeated, watching them put on their tactical vests and pull out their handcuffs. Walt makes one more call to Jack to call off the hit, because his own brother-in-law is one of the targets. He tells Jack to forget it, to not come. But Jack is already most of the way there. And here is where the show drops its single greatest hour, an episode called Ozymandias, named after the Shelley poem about an ancient king whose empire has crumbled into nothing but desert sand and broken stone. The poem famously describes a shattered statue with the inscription, "Look on my works, ye mighty," with the rest of the boast left to mock the king through time. The episode is Walter White's empire crashing down on him in real time. Hank and Gomez have just arrested him. They are reading him his rights. They are walking him toward the squad car. Hank, in a quiet moment before they leave, calls Marie and tells her he is okay. He tells her he got him. He tells her he loves her. It is the only good news Marie is going to receive that week, or that year. And just as Walt watches Hank hang up the phone, just as the moment threatens to actually be over, Jack Welker's truck and a van full of armed neo-Nazis come tearing over the hill in a cloud of red desert dust. A firefight erupts immediately. Gomez is killed almost in the first volley of bullets. Hank takes a round in the leg and goes down behind the car. Walt is on the ground screaming for Jack to stop, screaming that there has been a mistake, screaming because for once, for one terrible flash of clarity, Walt understands what he has done. He has brought a death squad onto his own brother-in-law. He has called in monsters on the man his wife loves, like a sister loves a brother. And Hank, bleeding heavily in the dirt, drags himself to his pistol and lifts it weakly. And Jack walks over with a gun in his hand, kneels down to look him in the eye, and asks him if he has anything he wants to say. And Hank, tough, stubborn, decent Hank, looks up at Jack and gives him his title and his name. He is an assistant special agent in charge of the DEA. He does not beg, he does not soften it, he does not look away. He turns his head one last time and looks at Walt, who is now sobbing and offering Jack money. All of his money. Every dollar he has, if Jack will just let his brother-in-law go. And Hank, in his last seconds of life, tells Walt very calmly that Walt is the smartest guy he ever met, and Walt is too stupid to see what Jack has already decided. He is going to die. He has known it since Jack stepped out of the truck. He is just disappointed Walt does not see it. And then Jack pulls the trigger, and Hank is dead. I do not think there is a moment in Breaking Bad more important than that one. Because Walt did not pull the trigger. Walt was on the ground sobbing. Walt was begging. But Hank is dead because of Walt. Because of every choice Walt made for 2 seasons. Because Walt was too proud to walk away from a meth empire even after he had 10 lifetimes worth of money, because Walt invited monsters into his own family's life. Hank is dead because of Walt, and somewhere in Walt's brain, in a place too deep to ever fully reach, he knows it. He has always known it, and he will know it until the last second of his own life. Jack and his men take Walt's barrels of money, almost all of them. They leave him a single barrel as a kind of cruel mercy. And then they find Jesse, who has been hiding under one of the cars during the firefight, dragging himself out, fully expecting to be killed too. And Walt, in a moment of pure naked cruelty, the kind of moment that finally and definitively answers the question of who he is when there is nothing left to hide behind, points at Jesse and tells Jack to take him too. Then Walt walks over, kneels down next to Jesse, who is being held to the ground by Jack's men, and tells him, in a voice that wants to wound and wants to wound forever, that he watched Jane die, that he could have saved her, that he stood there in the bedroom and watched her choke on her own vomit and did nothing. He says it slowly. He says it specifically. He says it to break Jesse the last little bit of the way. He says it because some part of him has been waiting to say it for years, and now, with everything else burned to the ground, there is no reason to hold back. Jack hauls Jesse off to a prison cell under his neo-Nazi compound, in a small cinder block bunker beneath the meth lab they have built using Walt's recipe. Jesse will spend months chained, beaten, starved, forced to cook the blue meth recipe under the threat of his ex-girlfriend Andrea's death and her son Brock's death. Jack and Todd have already done their research. They know where Andrea and Brock live. They know how to find them. They have a photograph of the two of them pinned to the wall as a constant reminder of what Jesse will lose if he tries to escape. Jesse is broken into pieces in that cell. He is a ghost. And Walt, having lost his money, his brother-in-law, and his protege, rolls his single remaining barrel of cash across the desert, all alone, until he finally hits a road and pays the driver of an old, beat-up truck to take him home. What waits at home is hell. His house is in chaos. Skylar and Walter Jr. have just come back from the car wash to find him packing up the family to flee. Walt is desperate. He is manic. He is still telling himself there is a way out of this, that they can all run together, that the family can be saved if everyone just listens to him for 10 more minutes. But Walter Jr., who has been quietly putting things together for a while now, finally hears the truth from his mother. His father, his hero, the man whose name he proudly carries, until recently, when he started insisting people call him Flynn because he was angry at his dad over something completely different, is a drug dealer and a murderer, and the reason his Uncle Hank is missing. Skylar grabs a kitchen knife. She lunges at Walt. They wrestle on the floor in front of their son, who screams and screams for them to stop, who is bigger than both of them and stronger, and finally puts himself between his mother and his father with his arms out like a wall. Walt cuts himself in the struggle. The kitchen is a mess. And Walter Jr., his crutches on the floor, calls 911 on his own father, begs the operator to send someone, yells at Walt that he is a sick man and a liar and a coward. And Walt, hearing his own son begging the police to send help, sees the look on Walter Jr.'s face, sees the disgust, sees the fear, sees the recognition that this man, the man he calls Dad, has been a monster the entire time. And Walt, with everything spinning around him, grabs baby Holly out of her crib and runs out the front door with her in his arms. He drives. He just drives. He has no plan. He is running on something animal at this point, some last broken refusal to accept that everything is over. He stops at a gas station. He has his daughter in the passenger seat. He changes her diaper on a tabletop in a stranger's home where he has briefly taken refuge to gather himself. He listens to her babble. And then she says one word over and over again. a word any father would recognize instantly as their daughter's first real attempt at language. Mama. 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 And Walt, broken open by the sound of his own daughter calling for the mother he has just kidnapped her from, cries silently in the front seat of the car. And then he picks up a payphone. He calls Skylar. He knows the police are with her. He knows they are listening to the call. And he proceeds to deliver one of the most painful, most calculated speeches in the entire series. He says terrible things, cruel things, sexist things. Things designed to shred Skylar's heart in real time. He tells her she is a fool who never appreciated him. He tells her she is a stupid woman who only ever cared about herself. He tells her he did all of this alone. He tells her she had no idea what was happening in her own house. He tells her not to ever cross him again. And it is a performance. Almost all of it is a performance. Because the police are listening, and Walt knows that if he plays the cold-blooded monster on tape, if he makes Skylar look like a battered, ignorant victim, the DEA will go easier on her. They might not charge her. They might leave the kids with her. He is trying, in his own grotesque, twisted way, to save his family one last time, by becoming the villain on the record so they can survive the fallout. It is both a confession and a final manipulation. It is the most love he has ever shown Skylar, and the most horrible he has ever been to her at the same time. And it is, in many ways, the cleanest distillation of who Walter White is. He cannot help anyone without also hurting them. He cannot love anyone without also hurting them. He cannot let go without taking one more piece on the way out. He leaves Holly at a fire station, gently, on a fire truck seat, the bare minimum decency he can manage. And then he disappears. This is where you might expect the show to end. A man on the run, a manhunt, a final confrontation in a federal courtroom. But what the show does instead, in the second to last episode, is something more brutal and more lonely. Walt vanishes into the New Hampshire wilderness, brought there by Saul's vacuum repair guy, who turns out to be a quiet middle-aged man named Ed Galbraith, who runs a vacuum repair store as a cover for his real business, which is making people disappear forever. Ed sets Walt up in a tiny cabin in the middle of nowhere, miles from any neighbor. No phone, no internet, no newspapers, just a wood stove and a stack of old paperback books and a barbed wire fence around the property. Once a month, Ed will come up with supplies. That is it. That is the rest of Walt's life. And we watch, in painful detail, Walt slowly disintegrate. He grows a beard. His hair has grown back from the chemo, gray and shaggy. He sits alone in the dark, watching old Mr. Magoo cartoons on VHS because they are the only tapes left in the cabin, and the cabin has no TV reception. His chemotherapy supplies run low. The cancer is back, and the chemo is not working as well anymore. He pays Ed $10,000 to sit with him for 1 hour during a delivery, just to have a human being in the room. Ed plays cards with him. They do not say much. Walt cries when Ed leaves. He is the saddest man on earth. And he is still not done. There is a moment in this episode that I think about constantly. Walt finally works up the courage to reach out to his son. He pays the bartender at a local payphone to make a long-distance call to a phone he has researched, to Walter Jr.'s school office, and have his son called to the principal's office for an emergency call about his sick father. Walter Jr. takes the call. He is older now, a little taller, a lot harder. Walt tells him that he is sending money home, that he is so sorry, that he loves him, that he never meant for any of this to happen, that he is going to make it right. And Walter Jr., with all the venom of a teenager who has lost everything and now has to talk to the man who burned it all down, just screams at him. Screams at him to die, screams at him to leave them alone, screams that he does not want any of his blood money, that his uncle is dead because of him, that his mother is broken because of him, that the whole family is in ruins because of him. And then he hangs up the phone. And Walt stands there, in the bar payphone, the last connection to his son ringing dead in his ear. And you can see something in him finally accept it. He calls the DEA from the same phone. He gives them his location at the bar. He sits down at the counter to wait for the police to come arrest him. He pours himself a drink. He is done. He is really done. He has accepted the end. And then he looks up at the television above the bar, and there is Gretchen Schwartz, sitting on a talk show with her husband, Elliot. And they are politely, gently, in their soft, well-mannered way, telling the nation that Walter White had nothing to do with the real success of gray matter technologies, that his contributions were minimal, that the only thing the world might remember him for is that he came up with the catchy name. They are erasing him on national television. They are turning him into a footnote. They are doing the one thing Walter White cannot abide. They are making him small again. And right there, in that bar, after months of solitude and despair and acceptance, the spring inside Walter White's chest tightens one last time. He gets up from the bar stool. He leaves before the police arrive. He gets on a bus, and then a train, and then another car, and he makes his way back to New Mexico. And he begins planning the final chapter of his life. He is not going to die quietly. He is not going to be remembered as a sad old man who lost it all. He is going to settle every score he has left to settle. Every single one of them. What follows is the final episode called Felina, which fans love to interpret either as an anagram of the word finale or as a reference to the heroine in the old Marty Robbins song El Paso, about a cowboy gunslinger and a doomed romance, and a man riding back to certain death because he cannot live without one more glimpse of the woman he loves. Walt's Felina is, in a very real sense, his identity, his pride, his Heisenberg, the thing he cannot live without one more glimpse of. He starts with Gretchen and Elliot. He breaks into their massive home one night, terrifying them in their own living room, and forces them, at what appears to be gunpoint by two laser-sighted weapons in the windows wielded by Saul's old guys Huel and Kubi, who Walt has hired as fake hitmen, to take a portion of his remaining money and put it in an irrevocable trust for Walter Jr. on his 18th birthday. $9 million, framed as a generous gift from the Schwartzes to their old colleague's grieving son. Walt tells them, in a voice that has not warmed up in months, that the best hitmen in the country are watching them now, and will be watching them for the rest of their lives. And if they do not make the gift happen, if they ever try to take the money back, they will both be murdered in their beds. He is bluffing. The hitmen are two clowns with cheap laser pointers from a hardware store. But Gretchen and Elliot will never know. They will live with that fear for the rest of their lives. And Walt gets to walk out of their house knowing that in his own twisted, sideways, deeply petty way, he has gotten the last word with the people who started him on this path. Whatever they say about him on TV, his money is going to his son. That is his legacy. That is his win. He visits Skylar one last time. He breaks into her tiny, miserable apartment, where she is living under suspicion and stress, while the case against her slowly unwinds. He looks at his daughter Holly through the bars of her crib, brushes her hair gently with his fingers, and says nothing. He sits down across from his wife at her tiny kitchen table, and he tells her something that should have been obvious to him 100 episodes ago. He tells her very plainly that all the speeches he ever gave about doing it for the family were not really true. He did it for himself. He liked it. He was good at it. And he was alive in a way he had not been in 20 years. It is the closest thing to a real confession he ever delivers in his life. After hundreds of hours of telling himself, telling Jesse, telling Skylar, telling the audience that he was doing all of this for his family,
He finally admits that the family was the cover story. The meth, the killing, the empire, the danger, the respect, the name, Heisenberg, the laboratory, all of it was for him. He loved it. He was good at it. He was, for the first time in 20 years, awake. And he is finally honest about that. He looks his wife in the eye and tells her the truth.
He does not try to take her back. He does not try to convince her to forgive him. He just lays it down and goes. He gives her the GPS coordinates to where Hank and Gomez are buried in the desert, written on a piece of paper, so she can use it as a bargaining chip with the DEA. He looks at his son one more time from a distance, through the small window in the back of the apartment building, watching Walter Jr. come home from school with his backpack and his crutches. He does not call out. He does not wave. He turns and walks away. He has one last appointment. Jack Welker's compound, where he believes the gang is still cooking the meth he taught them, where Lydia is still distributing it under his very own Heisenberg brand, where Jesse Pinkman, if Jesse is even still alive at this point, is being kept as a slave. First, he handles Lydia. He meets her at a coffee shop he knows she frequents, sits down at her usual table, where he knows she always orders the same thing. He waits for her to arrive. He tells her, with a strange politeness, that he has good news, that he wants to come back into the operation, that he has a new method that will get the recipe even purer. She is dismissive. She is annoyed. She tells him to leave. And then, very gently, he informs her that the little packet of stevia she always uses in her tea, the one she has just stirred into her cup, has been swapped out for ricin. She will be dead within a few days. There is no antidote. He has poisoned her in revenge for working with Jack against him. Lydia trembles. She chokes on her own breath. She curses him. Walt walks out of the coffee shop without looking back, and then he drives to Jack Welker's compound. He has prepared. In the trunk of his Cadillac, he has built a contraption, an automatic rifle mounted on a rotating motorized base, hidden inside the trunk, controlled by a small remote in his pocket. A modified machine gun rigged to a garage door opener mechanism that will, when triggered, sweep the room in an arc through the wall and shred anyone caught in its path. He parks just outside the compound. He drives in, hands raised, telling Jack's men he wants to see Jack. They search him, they take his keys, they bring him inside. He sits down across from Jack. Jack is sneering. Jack is offended that Walt would have the audacity to come back at all. Walt accuses Jack of being a partner with Jesse Pinkman, of giving Jesse a cut of the operation, which is a lie. But it is a lie designed specifically to set Jack off. Jack, insulted at the insinuation that he would partner with a junkie rat, calls for someone to bring Jesse out, to prove he is no partner, to prove Jesse is a slave. And there is Jesse. Walt sees him for the first time in months. Jesse is hollow. His face is scarred. His hair is long and matted. He is chained at the wrists. He looks like he has not seen the sun in a year. He looks at Walt with such a deep mineral hatred that you can feel it through the screen. And Walt, in a moment of split-second decision, lunges at Jesse, tackles him to the floor, presses the remote in his pocket, and the trunk of the Cadillac outside flips open, and the rotating machine gun starts firing through the wall of the compound. Glass shatters, bullets fly. Jack's men go down one after the other. Todd, the smiling sociopath who killed the boy on the bike and tormented Jesse for months, takes a round through the neck and goes still on the floor. Jack is hit, but not killed, dragging himself across the concrete, fumbling for his pistol. The machine gun runs out of ammunition. Walt is bleeding from the side where one of the rounds caught him during the spray. He pulls himself up. He picks up Jack's gun.
He walks over to where Jack is wheezing on the floor. Jack starts to make a plea, an offer, anything, telling Walt he can lead him to the rest of his money, that they can make a deal. And Walt, without flinching, without hesitation, shoots him mid-sentence. He turns. Jesse is on the floor, near Todd's body, his chains broken from the bullets that came through the wall. He is dragging himself toward Todd, his hands wrapped around a piece of broken chain. He is going to strangle Todd. He has been waiting to strangle Todd, but Todd is already dead. Jesse, animal in his rage, finally gets to a body that is no longer there to punish. He strangles Todd's corpse anyway. And then he stops, breathing hard, on his knees, broken and alive. Walt walks over. He gives Jesse the gun. He gestures for Jesse to shoot him. He tells Jesse that this is what he wants, that he came here to die, that Jesse should be the one who does it. Jesse looks at his old teacher, at the man who ruined his entire life, at the man who watched Jane die, at the man responsible for every nightmare he has ever had. And he tells Walt that if he wants it, he can do it himself. He drops the gun. He walks past Walt. He walks past everything. He gets into one of Todd's cars in the garage. He smashes through the gate. And he disappears, screaming and laughing and sobbing all at once into the New Mexico night. He is free, for the first time in years. And the show, in El Camino, follows him into the rest of his life. But that is its own story. Walt is alone now. He walks slowly through the compound, hand pressed to the bullet wound in his side. He pulls Lydia's phone from Todd's body, dials her one last time, and tells her with strange courtesy that yes, in case there was any doubt, she is going to die. He has already poisoned her with ricin. He just thought she should know. And then he walks down into the basement laboratory, the meth lab, the place where Jesse was chained up and forced to cook for months, the place where Walt's recipe was kept alive in his absence. He walks among the equipment, fingertips trailing along the stainless steel surfaces, the glass beakers, the copper kettles. And on his face, there is an expression I want to talk about for a second because it might be the most important shot in the whole show. Walt looks at this lab, this dirty, ugly, slapdash neo-Nazi meth lab, and his eyes are full of something that almost looks like love. He is home. He is finally in a place that is just his. Just chemistry, just glass, just the work. He is bleeding out. He has just murdered 6 people. He has lost his family, his money, his reputation, his name. But he is in a laboratory, and he is touching the equipment. And there is a soft, almost grateful smile on his face. He slumps slowly to the floor next to one of the tanks. He lies down on his back. He stares up at the ceiling lights. And the police, who were always going to come, finally arrive, sweeping the building with flashlights and drawn weapons. They find him there, in the middle of the lab, in a small spreading pool of his own blood. His eyes open, a peaceful expression on his face. Walter White is dead. Heisenberg is dead. The man in the underpants in the desert is dead. The chemistry teacher in the khaki pants is dead. The man with the pork pie hat and the goatee is dead. But before we close this out, I want to circle back and look at some of the threads we have been weaving together. Because Walter White is one of those characters whose meaning sneaks up on you. His arc is not just a body count. It is not just a tally of crimes. There are emotional turning points scattered across all 5 seasons that, looking back, make the whole shape of him cohere. Think about the way he treats people the moment they stop being useful to him. Think about Crazy 8, who he brings sandwiches and beer and almost lets go, until the math of survival changes and Walt picks up the bike lock. Think about Jane, who Walt has every reason to save and not a single reason to kill, except that her death will make his life simpler. Think about Gale,
who genuinely loved Walt as a mentor, whom Walt deletes from the world the moment Gale becomes a threat to his job security. Think about Mike, who Walt admired and respected and even feared until Mike said no one too many times. Think about the hitmen contracts on the 10 prison guys, ordered out of pure operational paranoia. Think about every single time Walt could have chosen mercy and chose pride instead. The pattern is so consistent you could set a watch by it. Then think about how he treats Jesse, which is the most complicated knot in the entire show. Walt loves Jesse. He genuinely does. There is a scene late in the run where Walt, in the middle of a horrible fight, tells Jesse he cares about him. There are scenes where Walt risks his own life to save Jesse from drug dealers in dangerous neighborhoods. There is a moment in the desert after the train heist when Walt sees Jesse alive and unhurt after Todd's gunshot and runs to him with what looks like real fatherly relief. And then, in the next breath, Walt uses Jesse. He poisons a child Jesse loves to manipulate Jesse. He lies to Jesse about Brock, about Jane, about everything for years. He sends Jesse to kill Gale, knowing the trauma will mark Jesse forever. He hands Jesse over to neo-Nazis to die, then changes his mind, then changes it again. He is incapable of love that is not also possession. He is incapable of letting Jesse go. And in the end, on the floor of that compound, when he sends Jesse out the door alive, that is the closest he ever comes to a clean act of love. He does not chase him. He does not call out, he just lets him drive away. Think about Skylar, who married a quiet, decent chemistry teacher and got, over the course of 5 years, a one-man hurricane of lies and money and fear and threats and ultimatums. Watch the long, slow erosion of her over the seasons. She goes from confident and a little condescending in the pilot to ashen and chain-smoking in the kitchen by the end. She tries everything. She tries enabling, she tries ignoring, she tries fleeing, she tries fighting, she tries laundering, she tries running her own scam out of the car wash, she tries breaking him with an affair, she tries protecting her sister, she tries protecting her son, she tries protecting her daughter, and every single avenue closes on her one by one because the man she married has decided that no exit is going to be allowed unless he chooses it. The final phone call she gets from him, the one where he is screaming insults at her from a payphone, is also a gift in his own twisted accounting. He is gifting her a defense to the federal government. And she has to live with that double meaning forever. Think about Walter Jr., the saddest casualty in this whole story in some ways. He is the only family member who never had any idea what his father was up to until almost the very end. He was the audience member in a way. He worshipped his dad. He looked up to him. He defended him when he was sick. He set up a charity website to raise money for his father's cancer treatment, which a money-laundering Saul Goodman secretly funneled Walt's own meth money into to explain the family's wealth. Walter Jr. had the wool pulled over his eyes more thoroughly than anyone. And when it finally comes off, in the kitchen with the knife, his father is on top of his mother. His uncle is missing. The world he thought he lived in is a lie. And the boy who proudly carried his father's name spends his last conversation with the man telling him to die. That is what Walter White did to his son. That is what those millions of dollars cost. Think about Hank, who started this show as the comic relief brother-in-law and became its tragic hero by the end. Hank's arc is, in some ways, the opposite mirror of Walt's. Hank starts loud and confident and a little bit of a bully, and slowly, painfully, learns humility through trauma. He survives the Tortuga bombing. He survives the cousins. He nearly dies in a parking lot. He has to learn to walk again. He has to swallow his pride and accept help. He has to admit that he was wrong about who Heisenberg was. He has to recognize that the man he loved like a brother has been laughing at him for years. And he goes to his death in the desert with absolute clarity. No last begging, no panic,
just a final word to Walt about what a fool Walt is for not seeing how this ends. Hank earns his nobility through hardship. Walt loses his through ease. Think about Marie, who absorbs more grief than any character in the entire show.
Marie loses her sister's trust, her husband's stability, her husband's life, her nephew's innocence, and her niece for periods of time, all of it tracing back to Walter White. The image of Marie at the end, dressed entirely in her trademark purple, learning that Hank's body is buried in the desert, is one of the small, quiet devastations of the finale. Think about Saul Goodman, the strip mall lawyer in the loud suits who walks into Walt's life as a sleazy bit of comic relief and becomes, by the end, the only man other than Walt who is going to survive this whole story relatively intact. Saul is the eternal pragmatist, the man who knew when to fold. When the empire collapsed, when Hank died, when Walt fled to New Hampshire, Saul went with the vacuum repair guy too, vanished into a new identity, ended up managing a Cinnabon in Omaha, and lived out his own slow tragedy on his own time. A story we get to follow across the show that bears his name. Think about every minor character who walked through Walter White's orbit and came out worse for the contact. Combo, the dealer shot down on a Friday afternoon while standing watch on a corner. Tomas, the 11-year-old boy used by rival dealers, shot in his front yard. Drew Sharp on the dirt bike. Jane Margolis on the mattress. Andrea Cantillo, killed on her own front porch by Todd, as a warning to a chained Jesse. The plane crash victims, the prison guys, Gail, Mike, Gus, Tuco, the cousins, Hector, Hank, Gomez, Brock, who at least survives, but who carries a stomach full of poison memories he will spend his entire life trying to process. The list of bodies, of half-lives, of permanent damage is staggering for what Walt has always insisted was a story about doing right by his family. The family ends up smaller and smaller as the story goes on. The bodies grow. He did not actually want any of it. I mean it. Walter White did not want the family. He did not want the cancer cure. He did not want the money. He did not even, in the end, want freedom. What he wanted, what he had always wanted, what he wanted from the second he sold his shares of gray matter for $5,000 in his 20s, was to be the smartest man in the room and have somebody acknowledge it. That is the whole engine of him. A man who was once a hair's breadth away from greatness, who walked away in a moment of pride, who spent the next 20 years rotting under the weight of his own choice, and who, given the smallest excuse and the smallest opportunity, climbed back onto a stage of his own making, no matter how many people he had to drag down to do it. He did not break bad because the world broke him. He broke bad because the world finally let him. Cancer gave him an excuse. Jesse gave him a partner. Albuquerque gave him a market. His family gave him a justification. And every single thing he ever needed to become a monster, he already had inside of himself, waiting. That is why his story still hits the way it does, more than a decade after the show ended. Because Walter White is not the story of a good man who got pushed too far. Walter White is the story of a small man who finally got to be big and discovered that bigness is a kind of poison. He hurt everyone he loved. He killed people who never had a chance against him. He destroyed his protege. He shattered his marriage. He turned his own son against him so completely that the boy refused to bear his father's name for a long stretch. He left a trail of bodies wide enough to be visible from space. And in the end, the only place he felt at home, the only place where he could finally lay down and die in something like peace, was a meth lab inside a neo-Nazi compound buried under the New Mexico desert. That is his legacy. Not the chemistry, not the genius, not the empire, not even Heisenberg. His legacy is the question every viewer has to answer for themselves once the credits roll. Which Walter White was the real one? The teacher in the pilot, or the man on the floor of the lab?
Was the kind chemistry teacher the costume, or was Heisenberg the costume? And the show, brilliantly, devastatingly, refuses to answer that question for you. Because deep down, maybe they are the same man. Maybe Heisenberg was always in there. Maybe the chemistry teacher was a long-running performance by a man who had buried his real self under decades of resentment. And the cancer was just the day he finally took off the mask. I want to spend a little more time with some of the textures of his journey, because we have hit the big notes, but there are quieter moments that I think tell you everything about Walt as a person. Take the way he handles his birthdays across the show. His 50th birthday opens the entire series. His wife arranges veggie bacon into the number 50 on his plate, and he eats it without complaint while pretending it is a treat. Hank shows off his gun at the party. Walt fades into the background of his own celebration. 1 year later, on his 51st, his wife is no longer his wife in any meaningful sense, and he eats bacon at a diner counter alone while a smiling waitress arranges the strips into the number 51 for him. He stares at it for a long moment. He is not a 50-year-old man choking on a doctor's bad news anymore. He is a 51-year-old kingpin with a duffel bag of cash in his car. He looks at the bacon like it is a small joke he is not sure how to laugh at. By the time he hits the events of his final birthday, in the cabin in New Hampshire, he is wearing a shaggy gray beard and being delivered chemotherapy supplies through a fence, marking the day with no one to acknowledge it. The descent from veggie bacon to nothing is the whole show in 3 breakfasts. Take the way he handles his classroom. He starts the series teaching chemistry to disinterested teenagers, and he is gentle, patient, frustrated mostly with their lack of curiosity. He gives lectures about the beauty of chemistry. He talks about it as the study of change. By the 2nd season, his work is starting to push into his classroom in scary ways. He starts pointing at the carcinogens in everyday products with a different kind of anger. He starts demonstrating chemistry of a more practical nature, like the time he and Jesse use a kit's worth of red phosphorus to fend off Tuco. He eventually has to give up teaching, both because the cancer makes it impossible and because the cooking takes up his time. The principal forces him out. He drifts out of that classroom and never returns to it. The kindly old chemistry teacher persona dies somewhere in there, although he keeps trying to wear the costume. Take the way he handles his money. Early on, the cash is a thrill. He spreads it out on the bed and looks at it with the wonder of a man who has never owned anything in his life. He flips through stacks of it as if it is going to disappear. He buys a flashy Pontiac Aztek for his son for his 16th birthday, which Skylar makes him return, in a beautiful little parable about Walt not even knowing what an appropriate gift looks like. He buys a house and almost no one to share it with. By the end, he is sleeping on a mountain of plastic-wrapped cash in a storage unit, and Skylar is staring at it like it is a corpse. The money has become the very obstacle he originally thought it was going to remove. And by Felina, almost all of it is gone. The remaining piece goes to the Schwartzes to launder into a gift for his son. He dies with nothing in his pockets and nothing in his accounts. Heisenberg, the great kingpin of Albuquerque, ends with literally not a dollar to his name. Take the way he handles Skylar over time. Pilot Walt is gentle with her, apologetic, sweet. He defers to her on the small things. He worries about being a good father to the new baby. He tries to play the role he has been quietly playing for years. By season 2, he is lying and snapping and pushing back. By season 3, he is breaking into her house when she has thrown him out. By season 4, he is bullying her with his wealth and his knowledge of her complicity. By season 5, he is delivering monologues about how he is the danger, weaponizing the very man she married against her. And then, in the back half of season 5, he is shrinking again. By his last visit to her, he is gentle, almost humble, almost sad in his quietness, finally telling her the one true thing he never said before. The arc is shaped like a wave, rising, cresting, crashing, and then leaving a wet imprint of itself on the sand. Take the way he handles Walter Jr. The pilot Walt walks in on his son being mocked by classmates at a clothing store and goes after the bullies with surprising aggression, knocking one of them down with a stomp of his foot. It is one of the only moments in the first episode where you see fire in Walt at all. Most of the early season, Walt is a deeply present, deeply caring father to his son. He worries about him constantly. When his son starts drinking too much at a party Walt hosts, Walt panics and pushes him in a way that is almost tender. When Hank tries to bond with the boy over guns and DEA glory, Walt is jealous in a sad, quiet way. He buys his son his first car. He pays his medical bills. He builds his entire stated rationale for the meth business around saving his son's future. And then, in the kitchen at the end, his son tells him to drop dead. The two of them never reconcile. The closest they come is a final long-distance look through a window. The boy's $9 million trust fund, which arrives years later through a manufactured story about generous family friends, will be the only thing Walt ever gives him that lasts. And his son will not even know it came from him. Take the way he handles violence. In the pilot, Walt is too gentle to fire a gun without flinching. He throws up in a bathroom after the first kills. He sobs on his basement steps after Crazy 8. He cannot even watch a person die without falling apart. By the middle of the show, he is fashioning his own weapons. He is poisoning children. He is shooting partners in parking lots. He is contracting hits on 10 men in 3 prisons. He is building rotating machine guns in his trunk. By the end, the violence is so practiced it does not even register on his face anymore. He shoots Jack while Jack is in the middle of a sentence and does not blink. The transition has happened so gradually that the only way to feel its weight is to lay the two ends of it next to each other. Take the way he handles consequences. Walter White spends 5 seasons becoming an absolute master of denying consequences. Every body he leaves behind, he convinces himself was somebody else's fault. Crazy 8 had a shard of plate. Emilio had a gun. Jane was a junkie. Gus was an oncoming danger. Gail was a casualty of business. Mike said no one too many times. Hank made his choice in the desert. Hector was already dying. The cousins came for him first. The plane crash, the only consequence he never even partially acknowledges to anyone. He just buries deeper. He becomes so practiced at this that the rare moments when guilt cracks through, like the night in the lab during the Fly episode, are jarring even to him. He has to retreat from those moments quickly because they threaten the structure he has built. Only at the end, in Skylar's apartment, does he finally let one consequence be named. He did it for himself. He liked it. He was good at it. He was alive. That is the only honest accounting he ever gives. And it costs him nothing now, because by the time he gives it, he is already a dead man walking. Take the way he handles his identity. The name Heisenberg is, in the beginning, almost a joke he is making to himself. A private little reference no one will get. The first time he uses the name to a dealer's face, it is a flourish, a moment of theater. By the time the name is being whispered in DEA briefing rooms and in cartel boardrooms, it has taken on its own life. People are paying him to be Heisenberg. People are getting killed because of Heisenberg. People are wearing t-shirts in some lower scenes of the show that say Heisenberg's face on them. And Walt, slowly, comes to love the name more than the man who wears it. He puts on the pork pie hat. He grows the goatee. He develops the squint and the silence. By the back half of the show, the chemistry teacher is barely peeking out from behind the pork pie. By the end of Granite State, it is gone almost entirely. And in Felina, when the chemistry teacher briefly comes back, it is only to deliver one true sentence to his wife before he goes off to die as the kingpin he wanted to be. Take the way the show keeps reminding us of his original choice.
There is a moment in the pilot where he is teaching his class about chemistry as the study of change, and you can feel the show telling you that this is the whole point, that this man is going to change, that change is the only constant in chemistry and in life. There is a later moment where he runs into Gretchen Schwartz and they sit in a coffee shop, and she asks him gently, almost pityingly, what happened to him? What happened to the man she once loved? And he turns it into rage. He tells her he built that company. He tells her she stole it from him. He weaves a self-pitying mythology in real time that bears almost no resemblance to anything that actually happened. And she just looks at him with sadness, because she has known him long enough to know that he is rewriting his own past as he speaks. The gray matter wound is the source code. Every horrible thing Walt does is in some sense a vengeance against being made small. Every win is a small revenge against being made small. He is not interested in being big. He is interested in not being small, and those are not the same thing. Take the way the show plays with mirrors. Walt and Jesse mirror each other constantly. Walt and Hank mirror each other constantly. Walt and Gus mirror each other in particular ways. Walt is the smart one, the cautious one, the one who plans. But Gus is the cautious one too. Gus is the long-term planner. The mirror reveals Walt's flaws, which is impatience and ego dressed up as caution. Gus would have walked away with $1 billion and a clean reputation. Walt cannot stop himself from poking the bear, because Walt does not really want to win the way Gus wants to win. Walt wants to be acknowledged. He wants to be seen. He wants to be the smartest man in the room and have everybody in that room know it. So he goes back for more, even when there is nothing left to take. Take the way the show plays with chemistry as a metaphor. Walt teaches that chemistry is the study of change, but he also believes deep down that he can control reactions, that you put the right pieces together and the right thing happens at the right time. That is how he thinks about people too. He thinks of Jesse as a reagent he can mix with another reagent to produce a result. He thinks of Skylar as a buffer that can be neutralized. He thinks of Hank as a variable he can isolate. And the show, again and again, reminds us that people are not chemistry. Reactions involving humans are not predictable. The smallest variable, a fly in a lab, a missing piece of plate in a basement, a book on a bathroom shelf, can blow up the entire experiment. Walt's tragedy is that he never quite gives up the belief that he can control them. Even at the end, when he plans Felina, he is still treating his last moves as a kind of formula. Ricin in the tea, machine gun in the trunk, trust fund through fake hitmen, confession to wife, final visit to compound. He thinks he is wrapping up a chemistry equation, but the people in the equation, Lydia and Skylar and Jesse and the police, all have their own variables. The reaction goes mostly as he planned, but every reaction with people is a little messy in ways he never quite admits. Take the way the show plays with the desert. The New Mexico desert is the show's stage in so many ways. The first cook happens there. Crazy 8 comes from there. Tuco dies there. Drew Sharp dies there. The methylamine heist happens there. The barrels of money are buried there. Hank dies there. Walt rolls his barrel of cash there at the lowest point of his life. The desert is the place where everything Walt has hidden eventually comes back out. The desert remembers. The desert is patient. The desert keeps every body and every barrel and every secret eventually returns to it. And in the pilot, in the cold open, Walt records his goodbye message in the desert, anticipating his death in the desert, even though he does not actually die there. The desert is the place where his story keeps almost ending until the very end, when the desert finally lets him crawl out of it to die in a lab under the desert instead. Take the way the show plays with Walt's intelligence. Walt is constantly being treated like the smartest man in the room, and he is in many ways. But the show is also very careful to show his blind spots. He underestimates Hank repeatedly. He underestimates Skylar repeatedly. He underestimates Mike. He underestimates Jesse. He thinks he is outsmarting Gus,
But Gus is one of the most patient strategists in the entire universe, and Walt is alive by luck and by Jesse's loyalty more than by any chess he himself plays well. The show is constantly poking the audience to ask if Walt is really as smart as he seems, or if he is just smart enough to fool the people he wants to fool. There is a strong case to be made that Walter White is brilliant within his domain, chemistry, and ordinary or even subpar outside of it. He survives because the people around him love him or fear him in convenient ratios. He wins because he is willing to break the rules of decency that the smarter people around him still have. It is not always intelligence.
Sometimes it is just an absence of conscience.
Take the way the show plays with Walt's body. He is dying in the pilot. His body is the engine of the whole story. He has the cancer that kills him later. He nearly drowns in a heroin storage unit. He gets beaten up multiple times. He shoots himself in his own foot in some ways throughout the run. He has trembles in his hands as the cancer comes back. He winces. He bleeds. His body is constantly reminding him that he is not actually immortal, no matter how many times he wins. And in the end, when he lies down in the meth lab, his body is failing all at once. The bullet in his side, and the cancer in his lungs, and the exhaustion in his bones. And he gives up the fight willingly. The body, like everything else, only had so much to give. Take the way the show plays with the names. Walter White is white as the color of innocence, of cleanliness, of paper, of bone, of pure snow, of pure meth before he learns to tinge it blue.
Heisenberg is a German name, evocative of physics and uncertainty, and the principle that the very act of observing a thing changes it. Mr. White, what Jesse calls him, is reverential and childlike. Heisenberg, what the cartel calls him, is mythic and threatening. The pivot between those two names is the whole show. By the end, Walter Jr. has rejected his own name and asked to be called Flynn because he is so ashamed of being a White. Holly is too young to understand. Skylar is in the process of trying to be Skylar something else, anything else, but she has been trapped by the marriage and the case file. Names matter in this show. They mark the territory of identity, and Walt's name, in the end, is what dies on the floor with him. Take the way the show plays with food. There are so many small moments at the table. The veggie bacon, the pancakes Jesse cuts into perfect shapes with a knife in a brief alternative life flashback, the chicken at Pollos Hermanos, the breakfast Walter Jr. is constantly eating and ordering at restaurants, the tea Lydia drinks with stevia at the cafe at the very end, the strawberries Gretchen offers Walt in their kitchen, the orange juice, the whiskey. Food is a kind of constant ritual in this show, an anchor for normal life that everyone clings to even as the rest of the world burns. There is something almost holy in how often these characters sit down to eat together. And there is something almost cruel about the fact that Walt is so often eating alone by the end. Holding a plate, putting it in the sink, washing the same plate after a meal of one. The empire of Heisenberg cannot quite produce a shared meal anymore. Take the way the show plays with science as an aesthetic. Walt's chemistry is beautiful. The cooks are filmed almost like ballets. The crystallization scenes are dance numbers, the blue product glittering in the light like a music video. The show is in love with the elegance of chemistry, the controlled magic of it, even as it shows you what that magic gets used for. Walt is the only character who finds true peace in the science. He is at his happiest at the cook table. Even in the very last shot of him, walking around the lab in the compound, you can see the fondness on his face. The science was the thing he was always best at. Everything else he tried to do with that science went sideways. But the science itself, the work itself, gave him something even his marriage and his fatherhood and his teaching could not give him. The chemistry was the one place he was, in his own mind, finally great. And take the way the show plays with the ending.
Felina is not a triumph, but it is also not a defeat. Walt dies. He is finally honest with his wife. He kills the people who took his money. He frees his protege. He gets his money to his son. He dies in his own little church. By the metrics he himself would have set, this is a winning final score. But every win is also a loss. Lydia is dead, and her child is now an orphan. Todd is dead, and Andrea is still gone. And Brock is still poisoned in his memory forever. Jack is dead, and his nephew is dead. And a half dozen of his men are dead, all of which the police are going to clean up and add to the body count. Jesse is alive, but ruined. Skyler is alive, but ruined. Walter Jr. is alive, but ruined. Marie is alive, but widowed. Hank is in a hole in the desert. Gomez is in a hole in the desert. So many people are in holes. The empire that Walt insists he built for his family is buried in those holes too. The story does not end happily. It ends terminally. The final shot of Walt, lying on his back, eyes open, is meant to be ambiguous. He looks peaceful. He also looks empty. He is finally what he made himself into. And it killed him. One of the strangest, most quietly powerful things about Walter White is how much of him you recognize. Not the meth cooking and the murders, hopefully, but the smaller things. The way he keeps grudges. The way he tells himself he is doing something for someone else when he is doing it for himself. The way he convinces himself the smartest move is also the most ethical one. The way he loves people who depend on him a little more than he loves people who do not need him. The way he wants to be told he is brilliant. The way he is so afraid of being small that he will burn down whole rooms to be big in them. We all know somebody like this. We all have a little of this in ourselves. And the show keeps holding up a mirror to that, very gently, and asking how far you might go if the rest of the world was tilted just slightly differently. That is, I think, the secret of why this character has stuck around in the cultural conversation for as long as he has. He is not a fantasy bad guy. He is not a comic book villain. He is a recognizable, ordinary, midlife American man who happens to have a chemistry degree and a sense of grievance and a terminal illness and a sleazy lawyer with the right contacts. The combination of factors that turn Walter White into Heisenberg are not that exotic. The world is full of people who have the same ingredients in slightly different proportions. The show is, in some sense, an extended thought experiment about what happens when all the dials get turned at once. And the answer it provides is not flattering to its main character. The answer is that, given the chance, a lot of Walter Whites would do most of what Walter White did. The chemistry teacher with the kind smile is one bad day, one extra dose of pride away from the man in the pork pie hat. That is what makes him so memorable, and that is what makes him so disturbing all at once. Spend a little time with the way the show treats fatherhood, because it is one of the central rivers running through the entire arc. Walt is a father. Hank is a father figure to Walter Jr. Jesse becomes a father figure to Brock. Mike is a grandfather to Kaylee. Gus is a kind of mentor father to his organization. Hector is a kind of grandfather to Tuco and the cousins. The whole show is full of older men trying to teach younger men how to live, and the younger men trying and mostly failing to live up to it. And Walt is the worst of all the father figures, even though he insists again and again that fatherhood is the entire point of his story. He is a father whose son begs the police to send help to his own house. He is a father who poisons another father figure's surrogate son. He is a father who walks away from his own infant daughter at a fire station. He is a father who ends his life trying to use a fake gift from old friends to compensate his son for everything he has done. The man is obsessed with the idea of fatherhood and almost entirely incompetent at the practice of it. There is a particularly painful moment deep in the back half of the show where Walt sees Walter Jr. asleep on a couch in the living room. It is late at night.
The boy has fallen asleep with a textbook on his chest. And Walt stands there in the doorway for a long time, watching him breathe, his face soft, almost ashamed. It is the kind of look every father has given his sleeping child. And for a moment, you can see the original Walt, the chemistry teacher, the worrier, peeking out from under the pork pie. And then he turns away and goes to bed, and tomorrow he will be Heisenberg again. The original Walt is always there, occasionally, in glimpses. But the original Walt cannot get the keys back. The Heisenberg has taken the keys and refuses to give them up. The original Walt only gets to look in from the hallway and look at the consequences of what the other version of him is doing and feel guilty about it for an evening, and then go to sleep.
Talk a little about Jesse, because Jesse is the other half of this story. In many ways, the heart of it. Jesse Pinkman is a kid who never quite had a chance. His parents have written him off as the family disappointment. His brother is the perfect golden child. His teachers always told him he would amount to nothing. And the only adult in his life who ever really treated him like he was worth something was his aunt, who he watched die of cancer in his late teens. Jesse cooked meth not because he was an aspiring drug lord, but because he could not think of anything else to do with his life. He fell into it the way other people fall into office jobs, and he is constantly horrified by the implications. Walt finds him at the lowest point of his life, in the pilot, and pulls him back into a deeper hole. And then, over 5 seasons, the two of them weave around each other in this awful brotherly dance. There are real moments of love between them. There is a beautiful little episode where Jesse has to sit at the table with a hostage in a basement, and ends up bonding with the guy over the death of the guy's own son. And Walt, watching this, finds himself almost protective of Jesse in a paternal way that the show does not overemphasize. There is a moment late in the run where Walt is making sure Jesse is taken care of by Saul, that Jesse has access to the right kind of new life, even after he and Jesse have already had massive falling outs. There is something complicated and real in Walt's affection for Jesse. It is not performative. It is also not enough to overcome his self-interest. When the moment comes to choose, Walt always chooses himself. But the love is real underneath. That is what makes it so awful. Jesse, for his part, idolizes Walt. He calls him Mr. White, even after the partnership is years deep. He defers to Walt's expertise. He absorbs Walt's contempt over and over and over, in the way that a kid will absorb a parent's contempt because the alternative is acknowledging that the parent does not love them. Jesse is, in many ways, a son who never had a real father, looking for one in the wrong place. And Walt is, in many ways, a man whose love of his own son is so possessive and idealized that he cannot truly love a flawed surrogate. He alternates between treating Jesse like a son and treating him like a tool. He cannot decide which. Or, more accurately, he cannot stop himself from sliding back and forth between the two as it suits him. By the end, Jesse has seen Walt clearly enough to hate him absolutely, but he cannot bring himself to shoot Walt at the compound. There is too much shared history, too much complicated love. He just drops the gun and drives away. The look Jesse gives Walt as he leaves is one of the show's quietest goodbyes. In the events of El Camino, which is the film that picks up immediately after Jesse drives out of the compound, we see Jesse try to build a life out of the wreckage. He has to outrun the police and the remnants of Todd's connections. He has to come to terms with what he has been through. He has to grieve everyone he has lost. He has to find a way to leave Albuquerque forever. And in one of the more emotionally generous decisions the franchise ever makes, Jesse does get out. He pays Ed, the vacuum repair guy, to set him up with a new identity in Alaska, and the film ends with him driving north into the snow, into the rest of his life. It is the only mostly happy ending anybody in this universe gets. And it happens because Walt, in his final act, freed him. Whatever else Walt did, that was real. He freed Jesse before he died. That is also part of the legacy. Talk a little about how the show handles the rest of the family in the aftermath. Skylar is left to negotiate her own future with the DEA.
The coordinates Walt gave her for Hank's and Gomez's bodies become her bargaining chip. She is not exonerated, but she is given enough space to start rebuilding. The car wash is gone. The house is gone. She and the kids move to a small apartment. She works data entry. She survives. She does not thrive, but she survives. Walter Jr., eventually called Walter again by some of his friends and family, becomes a slightly bitter but stable young man. He gets the trust fund from the Schwartzes when he turns 18, the $9 million laundered through Walt's old friends, and he never quite understands where it came from, although he probably suspects. Holly grows up not knowing her father except in newspaper clippings and old DEA case files, and her mother's reluctant retellings of stories she would rather not retell.
Marie continues, in her purple, in her grief.
Hank's grave is somewhere in the desert. The desert keeps him too.
And Walt himself, by the very last shot, is at peace, in his own dead-eyed way. He is in a lab, surrounded by chemistry, the only place he ever felt at home. There is something almost beautiful about it, even as you understand that nothing else about this story has any beauty in it at all. The image is the inversion of the cold open we started with. There, Walter White in his underwear in the desert, terrified, alive, panicked, recording a goodbye to a family he is desperate to keep. Here, Walter White in his coat in a lab, calm, dying, alone, having said goodbye to a family that does not want him back. Different versions of the same man, framed exactly in opposition. The desert, the lab, the terror, the peace. The cancer ticking somewhere inside him in both shots, just at different stages of doing its work. That is Walter White. That is the whole arc. Look, there are a lot of ways to be a bad person on television. You can be cackling and theatrical and obviously evil. You can be smug and elegant and quietly menacing. You can be brutal and uncomplicated. Walter White is none of those. Walter White is the quietest possible kind of evil, the kind that knows your wife's name and your son's birthday and brings a salad to the cookout. The kind that opens his car door for elderly women in parking lots while he has a duffel bag of methylamine in the trunk. The kind that volunteers to coach his son's swim team while he is contracting hits on prison guards. He is the man next door, with a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything, and somewhere underneath, a chemistry teacher's curiosity has been smelting itself into something he himself does not want to examine too closely. That is why he sticks. That is why we are still talking about him more than a decade after the show ended. He is recognizable. He is reasonable. He is polite. He is, on paper, a sympathetic protagonist with a terminal diagnosis and a family to provide for, and a long history of being underestimated. And the show takes that sympathetic profile, gives him everything he needs, and watches him drink poison out of his own cup. Again and again, choosing the worst possible decision at every single fork in the road, while always being able to recite a sensible reason for the choice. He builds a monster out of himself, one careful chemistry lesson at a time. And the way the show tracks that change, atom by atom, is what makes Walter White one of the most fully realized characters in the history of the medium. If you came into this story already thinking Walt was the bad guy, the show wants you to find moments of sympathy for him. If you came into this story thinking Walt was the hero, the show wants you to find moments where you finally cannot pretend anymore. The show is a long, careful argument with the audience about how easy it is to root for somebody who is making everything worse for everyone around them, especially if that somebody has a sympathetic backstory and a polite manner and a smart way of explaining himself. It is a careful, patient lesson about not letting backstory excuse behavior, about not letting intentions outweigh outcomes, about the difference between a man and the man he tells himself he is. And it does that lesson while also being a great crime thriller, a great family drama, a great character study, a great dark comedy. The genius of the show is that it functions on every one of those levels at once.
You can watch it for the train heist.
You can watch it for the marriage scenes. You can watch it for the philosophy.
You can watch it for the cinematography, which is some of the most striking in television, with the high-contrast desert color palette and the low-angle shots and the swimming pool perspective. You can watch it for the way Bryan Cranston turns Walter White into a body language exhibit. The small, careful, precise movements of a chemistry teacher in the early seasons, giving way to the larger, more performative gestures of Heisenberg in the later seasons. The man literally walking differently as he becomes someone else. You can watch it for any of those, and under all of them, there is this terrible little tragedy about a small man who got big in the worst possible way. At the end, when the police find his body in the lab, the song that plays over the closing shot is Baby Blue by Badfinger. The lyrics, which I will not quote here, are basically about a man saying goodbye to something he loved and lost. Most people read the song, in this context, as Walt's goodbye to the chemistry, to the work, to the blue meth, to the one thing he was ever truly great at. It is not a goodbye to his wife. It is not a goodbye to his son. It is a goodbye to the work. And that, more than anything else in the finale, tells you what the show wants you to take from his ending. The chemistry was his real love. The chemistry was his real wife. The chemistry was the thing he came alive for, and the thing he died for, and the thing that, in some terrible sense, made him real to himself. Everything else, the marriage and the fatherhood and the teaching and the empire, was secondary to that one true love. And the song lets him have that goodbye, even as the police flood the lab around him.
So what is the legacy?
The legacy is that Walter White did not exist before the cancer told him he was about to stop existing. He had been going through the motions for 2 decades. He had been smiling politely while the world made him invisible. He had been swallowing every small humiliation and not turning it into anything. And then, given an excuse to stop being invisible, he stopped being invisible in the most destructive way available. He let the resentment that had been quietly fermenting in him for 20 years out of the bottle, and what poured out was Heisenberg. Heisenberg killed dozens of people. Heisenberg made millions of dollars. Heisenberg ran circles around the DEA and the cartel and his own brother-in-law. And then Heisenberg killed Walter White by killing everyone Walter White loved. And Walter White, lying on the floor of the lab, was finally allowed to die because there was nothing of him left to keep him standing.
The legacy is that pride costs more than any other emotion in this whole story. Anger costs less. Fear costs less. Even grief costs less. Pride cost Walter White his family, his name, his fortune, his protege, his brother-in-law, his own life. Pride is the thing he could never put down. He carried it from gray matter all the way to the lab in the compound, and it pulled him under one careful inch at a time. Every time he could have walked away with a decent ending, he refused, because walking away would have meant admitting somebody else was right, and he could not stand the idea of somebody else being right. The cost of pride, paid over 5 seasons, in cash and blood and grief, is the show's primary balance sheet, and the balance is unflattering. The legacy is that nobody really wins. Jesse drives north into a half-life, traumatized for the rest of his days. Skylar is rebuilding from scratch, with a daughter and a teenager and no money. Walter Jr. has a trust fund and a dead father, and a name he keeps trying to outgrow. Marie has a memory of her husband and a hole in the desert. Hank has the desert. Gomez has the desert. The plane crash victims have 167 holes scattered across the city of Albuquerque. The dealers and the goons and the cousins and Hector and Tuco and Gale all have nothing. Gus's empire is dust. The DEA file on Heisenberg is closed but useless. Saul is hiding in Omaha, managing a cinnamon roll franchise under a fake name.
The good people are wounded. The bad people are dead. And the people in the middle, like Skylar and Marie and Walter Jr., are quietly trying to figure out how to live the rest of their lives in the shadow of what one man did.
The legacy is that the only people who fully understood what Walter White was, all the way through, were Mike and Gus. They saw it in him from the very first interaction. Mike tried to manage it. Gus tried to use it. Both of them eventually died because Walt's pride outran their ability to control him. The smartest people in his life saw him clearly and still got killed by him. That is also part of the legacy. There is no level of intelligence in the people around Walter White that ever protected them from him. Either they loved him too much, or they thought they could keep him in check, or they thought they could outmaneuver him, and all of them were wrong. Only Jesse, broken and traumatized, finally walked out of his orbit alive, and only because Walt himself decided to free him. The legacy is that Heisenberg, the name, has its own afterlife. Years after the show ended, people are still wearing the pork pie hat on Halloween. The blue meth, which was made out of dyed rock candy for the show, is sold in joke gift shops in Albuquerque. The house where the Whites lived has become a tourist destination so popular that the actual owners had to put a fence around it because people kept throwing pizzas onto the roof. The show is a cottage industry. The character is iconic enough to have outlived his own story. Walter White is, in the cultural imagination, more alive than Walter White ever was inside the story itself. The mask outlived the man. Which is, in the meanest possible way, exactly what Walt always wanted. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be a name. He got his wish, on the back of a body count. But none of that takes away from the central tragedy. Walter White was a man who could have done so much else with his life. With his brain, with his patience, with his rigor, with his actual deep love for his family in the early years. He could have been 1,000 things. He could have been a great teacher. He could have been a Nobel laureate. He could have been a good father who lived to see his daughter graduate. He could have been a husband who watched his wife rebuild her business with him. He could have been the proud uncle at family barbecues. He could have been a man whose chemistry teaching changed the lives of the kids who passed through his class. He could have been any of those things. He had the material for any of those lives. And he traded them all in, one careful trade at a time, for the chance to be feared and respected and rich. None of which lasted very long, and all of which left him dead on a floor. The chemistry teacher is the saddest version of him, because the chemistry teacher is the one who could have lived. The kingpin is the showy version, the one we remember, the one people put on t-shirts, the one who got to be on magazine covers in his own twisted way. But the chemistry teacher is the one who got buried in the dirt of his own pride, alive, gasping, and unable to climb out. The chemistry teacher tried to claw his way to the surface a few times across the show. The Fly episode. The night Walter Jr. fell asleep on the couch. The morning he watched his daughter say mama. The phone call to his son. The moment in Skylar's apartment. The fingers along the equipment. Glimpses, just glimpses. The chemistry teacher kept trying to come up for air, and Heisenberg kept holding him down. In the very end, when the cancer is going to finish the job anyway, the chemistry teacher gets one true sentence at the kitchen table. He gets to tell his wife the truth. He gets to be honest, finally, after years of lies. That is the one thing the chemistry teacher manages to do before he dies. It is something. It is not much in the face of everything else, but it is something. He gets to leave Skylar the truth she has been demanding for years. And then he goes off and dies as Heisenberg, in the lab, with chemistry as his last view of the world. The chemistry teacher and Heisenberg both die in the same body at the same moment.
The light above the equipment goes out for both of them. If you take only one thing from the whole arc, take this. Walter White was not made by his circumstances. Walter White was revealed by them. The cancer did not turn him into Heisenberg. The cancer gave Heisenberg permission to come out. Everything that was going to be Heisenberg was already inside the chemistry teacher, in carefully stored bottles labeled with neat little chemistry teacher labels, just waiting for an excuse to mix. The excuse came in the form of a stage 3A diagnosis, and a Pontiac Aztec, and a stack of medical bills, and a DEA ride-along on a Tuesday afternoon. And what came out of the mix was a man who ruined every life he touched on the way to dying alone in a laboratory under a neo-Nazi compound. That is the chemistry of Walter White. That is the formula. That is the work. He was, in the end, a man who got exactly what he wanted, on his own terms, in his own way. He died as Heisenberg, in a laboratory, on his own schedule, after settling every score on his list. By his own internal scoreboard, he won the entire game. And the show is brilliant in that it lets him win, technically, while making sure you understand that winning was the worst thing that could have happened to him. The win is the loss. The success is the indictment. The accomplishment is the body count. He came, he saw, he cooked, he killed, he died. The whole story can be told in 5 verbs, and every single one of them ends in a tragedy. That is the story of Walter Hartwell White. That is the chemistry teacher who became the kingpin, who became the corpse. That is the small man who got to be big and discovered too late that the only thing bigness does to a person is make their fall longer.
That is the engine of pride at full throttle,
The equation balanced in red ink. The experiment that worked exactly as the chemist intended and produced exactly the result the chemist wanted. And exactly the result the chemist could not have predicted. Because the chemist was inside the experiment the whole time. That is Walter White. That is Heisenberg. That is, if you take the long view, one of the saddest stories ever told on television, dressed up as one of the most exciting. Thank you for spending this time with me. Walter White's story does not have a lesson, really. It has a question. The question is how much of him you recognize in yourself, and what you would do if the dials in your life started turning the way his did. Most of us would like to believe we would do better. The show, very gently, refuses to let us be confident about that. The show suggests that the line between the chemistry teacher and Heisenberg is thinner than any of us would like to think it is. And the only way to keep that line from collapsing in your own life is to refuse, again and again, the small temptations of pride. To pick up the phone instead of hanging it up, to accept the help instead of refusing it, to admit you were wrong instead of doubling down, to love your family the way they need to be loved instead of the way you need to love them, to choose mercy when mercy is the smaller payoff, to put down the bag of fulminated mercury and just go home.
Walter White could not do any of that. He could not put it down. Not once. Not in 5 seasons. Not when his wife asked him to. Not when his son asked him to. Not when Jesse begged him to. Not when Mike warned him to. Not when Hank cornered him in his garage. Not when the cancer came back. Not when there was more money than he could ever spend. He kept choosing the next move on the board, even when there were no good moves left. And in the end, on the floor of the lab, with the cancer in his lungs and the bullet in his side and the song fading in and out around him, he finally got to put it down. Not because he wanted to, because there was nothing left to pick up. That is the legacy of Walter White, a man who learned to love himself only in the act of destroying himself, a teacher who became a monster who became a memory, a man who wanted to be seen and was finally seen in the worst possible light. A husband, a father,
a brother-in-law, a partner, a chemist, a killer, a king, and a corpse. All in 5 seasons, all in 2 years of his life, all from one bad diagnosis, one DEA ride-along, one stack of textbooks under his arm in a driveway, and one polite, quiet 50-year-old man who had been waiting a very long time to find out what he was capable of. He found out. We all found out with him. And once you know, you cannot unknow it. That is the show. That is the man. That is Walter White in full. Thanks for sticking with me all the way through. If you found your way here, you probably love this story the way I do, all of its terrible beauty and all of its quiet horror. Take a second to think about which version of Walt sticks with you the most. The chemistry teacher in the pilot? The bald man in the empty parking lot? The kingpin in the pork pie hat? The bearded ghost in the cabin? The man in the lab with the lights coming up around him for the last time?
They are all him. They were always all him.
And the show, brilliantly, gives him every chance to be otherwise and watches him refuse every single time. Take care of yourselves. Watch out for the chemistry teachers in your own life. The quiet ones with the polite smiles and the carefully managed resentments. Maybe more than that, watch out for them in yourself. Pride is a slow chemistry. Pride takes time. Pride mixes well with grief and resentment and clever brains, and the reaction is always exothermic. The energy released will burn down your house if you let it. That is the entire story of Walter White, from the cold open in the desert to the closing shot in the lab. Every choice, every body, every excuse he gave himself on the way down, every small kindness he buried under a larger cruelty, every moment he could have stopped and did not, every moment he became, by careful, patient, ugly chemistry, the man he had always quietly wanted to be.
Goodbye, Mr. White. Or Heisenberg. Or Walt. You were all the same person in the end, and we will be telling your story for as long as television exists. That is, in its own dark way, the only kind of immortality you ever really wanted. You got it. I hope the chemistry was worth it.